More making their way, and then we'll get started. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our stakeholder meeting for the Cypress Basin Clean Rivers program. We're doing this hybrid, so some of the folks are online. You can see on the screen. We've got a good number of people that are joining us virtually, and we've got quite a few people here in the room, so it's great to see a good turnout. A couple of housekeeping things. First is the restrooms are just outside the glass doors, and there is coffee and water and snacks out there. If you haven't signed in person, the sign-in sheets are by the front door where you came in, so sometimes y'all could sign in there, would appreciate it. I think we want to start by doing introductions, and so I'll start in the room first, and then we can go to the folks online. My name is Robert Spate. I'm the project manager for the Cypress Basin here for the Clean Rivers, and I have been doing this about 8 years, and so it's always glad to get people in the room so that we can talk about the issues that we have or what we're doing in the basin.
My name is Randy Russian. I'm with Water Monitoring Solutions Incorporated. We're the Clean Rivers Program contractor for NETMWD and in the Cypress Basin. We've been working in this watershed for 15 years now. Thank you, Walt.
I'm Carly Rotzler. I'm from TCQ Swickham. I'm the new assessor for the Cypress Basin for the integrated report.
Adam Wisnat with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Recently been put in the River Studies program or River Studies team, and I'm almost done time.
Good deal.
I'm Sean Diggan. I work for Texas A&M Forest Service. I'm the Wildland Urban Interface Coordinator for the 23 counties of Northeast Texas.
Weldon Dent. I'm a field program specialist for Texas A&M Forest Service, office out of Luckman. We work with wildfire, scout fire grants in East Texas, and mechanical fuel production projects.
I'm Jenna. I'm the TCQ Clean Rivers Program Project Manager.
I'm Sandy Wexler. I serve on the board with Northeast Texas Water Municipal District, and I represent the city of Lone Star.
Tim Bister. I'm a district fisheries management biologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife. I'm Walt Sears, general manager of the Northeast Texas Water District. I want to say when I came to my first Clean Rivers meeting, most everybody was older than me. And it's refreshing to see a new generation. Present company accepted. There are some faces that were in that first room, and I appreciate the longstanding dedication you've had, Roy and others. But I also appreciate the new vitality that's in this, and that gives our region confidence to know that things are getting better.
I'm Jack Salmon. I'm on Northeast Texas Water District's board of directors, and that represents the city of Athens.
I'm Lauren Williams. I'm with TCQ Region 5.
I am Roy Darville. I'm a professor at East Texas Baptist University, and I also work with the Kettle Lake Institute. There she is.
We're going to let Laura Ashley introduce us.
All right.
I'm going to give up that seat.
Okay. Laura Ashley.
Thank you, Laura Ashley overnight. Kettle Lake Institute. So good to be together again and out of practice for actually.
We all are. So, okay. Thank y'all. The folks online, if you want to introduce yourself, I guess I will go by the way it's showing on the screen. So Mandy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Mandy Gordon with the University of Houston Clear Lake.
Susan Sedberry.
Yeah, this is Steve, Cypress Basin Master Naturalists.
All right, good y'all to join us. Reuben Gay.
Good morning, Ruben, Parks and Wildlife, County Regulatory Biologist for Houston, Cherokee, Russ County, currently serving as Vice Chair for the Northeast Texas CDN, Conservation Delivery Network, and currently a recruitment rep for Parks and Wildlife as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Gary Bowles.
Gary Bowles, I'm an engineer out of Longview, Texas.
David Campbell.
Parks and Wildlife Biologist for Gregg, Upshur, Marion, Harrison, and Camp counties.
Rich Brontoli.
Rich Brontoli, Executive Director of the Red River Valley Association.
Good to see you, Rich. Bill Bardish.
Good morning, everybody. Bill Bardish, Lower Mississippi Valley Joint Venture. Glad to be here.
Dave Cowan.
Good morning, Dave Cowan with the North Texas Municipal Water District. I'm watershed manager for the district.
Angela Kilpatrick.
Hi, Angela Kilpatrick. I'm with the Trinity River Authority, and I also do work with Randy Russian.
Thank you. Yeah. Paul Prang.
So I'm Paul Prang with the Architects Council of Governments. I'm the Environmental Resources Coordinator.
All right. Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra Villarreal. I'm with North Texas Municipal Water District.
Thank you for participating. Nelson Roach.
I'm a private landowner in the basin, and Walt Sears promised me he was going to pay me a big royalty for the clean water that comes off of my property.
I will pay just like we did in college.
Okay, that was good. Thank you, Nelson.
Good morning, Nelson.
Bregan Brown.
Good morning. My name is Bregan Brown, and I'm the Kills and Spills Team Coordinator for Texas Parks and Wildlife in Region 2, which includes the Cypress River Basin.
Sarah Burns.
Sarah Burns, I'm a permit coordinator with North Texas Municipal Water District.
Laura Rickman.
I'm Laura Rickman. I'm with the TCEQ. I work with Carly and was the assessor for the 2022 integrated report.
All right. Did I miss anybody online? That was everybody I saw. Okay. If not, I think we'll get started now with the program. Walt, did you want to say anything else other than you're good?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I do want to say something quickly, and that is, in the old days, we had to be in a room to get together. I appreciate the hybrid format of this meeting. That's an increase in technology. And Roy, we remember when there was equipment that was primitive that got advanced. And so we are the product of getting to do good things in a more efficient way. And I do want to mention that because as we talk about all the stuff that's going on in the basin, some of that would not be possible without the advances in technology. But a good chunk of it is the vitality that's in this room and online. So I do want to express appreciation for everyone who's participating this morning. For those online, we did have refreshments here in the office, so there is still value in coming to a room. But I do appreciate the work that everyone is doing to make this basin stronger and better. And it ranges from landowners like Nelson to state agencies and federal agencies. So it is quite a diverse group. And I appreciate y'all's attention this morning.
And I'll second that. It takes a team to do the things we do. And so I'm really pleased and excited at the number of entities that are joining both in person and online. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy Rushing now. We do have a change in the agenda, and Mandy is going to go do her presentation first. She's out in the field now, so we will get started with that. Thank y'all.
Right. Okay, Mandy, you're welcome to go ahead and get started. Oh, just a second. We had 4 things in the chat.
I think that was just people putting their affiliations. and
Oh,
whatnot
okay.
in
All right.
there,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good deal. Yeah, Mandy, if you want to take over, I'll take the wheel.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can share my screen. Can you guys all see that? I can hear you guys pretty well in there, actually. It's nice.
Yeah, I can see you now.
Looks good.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. Well, first off, I just really wanted to thank both Randy and Robert for inviting me to come here. It's always really great to see people. I'm really kind of bummed that I'm not able to actually get out there and be in person with you guys. I've definitely seen and heard a lot of very familiar names. So great to see you guys. Thanks so much for listening to me babble on here for a couple of minutes. I'm here to talk about some of our ongoing surveys with aquatic turtles here in Texas, and we are focusing specifically on 2 different species of kind of varying biology between the 2 of them that you guys might actually encounter through some of your routine monitoring or through some of your new updated monitoring projects. So I'm going to focus here on what's called the Western chicken turtle and the alligator snapping turtle for these projects here. And first thing I want to address is, why are we studying these species? And so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has identified a conservation need for both species here in Texas and actually range wide throughout the United States. Both of them were petitioned for listing for protection under the Endangered Species Act for varying reasons. And then once a species is petitioned, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducts what's called a 90-day finding, where they review information about the species. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the review process on that, what U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does is they pull together some available information, and then they make decisions based on these 5 different factors, looking at how much information is available and how much impact could potentially occur to each species. And so these factors are kind of broken down into these broad categories, such as habitat alteration, overutilization, disease or predation, inadequate regulatory mechanisms, and then this last factor, factor E, is kind of a catch-all. If they can't really group something easily into A, B, C, or D, they throw it into this natural and man-made factors. And what's interesting about both of these species is that both of them were found to have potential significant impacts based on at least 4 of these different factors. And so after U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducts that, they conduct what's called a species status assessment. And so a species status assessment goes into detail and into depth on the different available information for the species. And for the Western chicken turtle, the species status assessment is actually not due until 2024. So data that's being collected now on the species will actively be incorporated into that assessment. The alligator snapping turtle, on the other hand, their species status assessment was issued back in October of 2021. And in that assessment, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recommended that the alligator snapping turtle be listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. But they did specifically state within that species status assessment that this was primarily due to limited data availability. So what I'm going to go over with both of these species here might be kind of a review for some of you guys, because I know I've definitely talked to a handful of you guys in person. Some of you may have even seen me present this back at the meeting last year. So for those of you that have seen this stuff before, it'll be kind of an update for you. But then those of you guys that are seeing it for the first time, I will talk turtle with you all day. So if anybody wants to reach out with questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. And so now I'm just going to kind of take this into a species specific look. And so first we'll talk about these Western chicken turtles here in Texas. And so the Western chicken turtle ranges pretty much throughout all of East Texas, with the Guadalupe River Basin serving as its kind of estimated western extent. So all of these green counties that are here on the map are counties where we could potentially find or observe Western chicken turtles. They prefer these ephemeral or depressional freshwater wetlands. So maybe not so much the flowing stream systems that a lot of you guys work in, but a lot of those fringe habitats or even prairie potholes that some of you guys might evaluate and look at. But they really like these areas that tend to dry up periodically throughout the year. Because of that habitat type, there's a few different behavioral and biological characteristics that are unique to the species. And one of those is that they exhibit a shorter lifespan and in some cases a smaller population size when compared to other aquatic turtle species. And so all of these factors together can lead to an increased perception of rarity for the species. Another thing that really kind of adds another layer to this onion here is that Western chicken turtles exhibit a discrete seasonal activity pattern where they can actually bury themselves in the ground up to 8 months at a time.
Newsletter
Did somebody have a question?
that, and since this is the 10 years of habitat of the Edward Aquifer habitat conservation.
Oh, are we good?
Okay.
Okay, all right, sorry about that. So this discrete seasonal activity pattern and this adaptation for burying themselves in the ground up to 8 months at a time can actually make it very difficult for us to find them within the narrow window in which they're actually out and about and moving around. And so what we've been doing is applying what I'm calling the spaghetti method for all of these different techniques that we can think of to detect them. So we're literally thinking of any potential method that would find them and then throwing it against the wall to see what sticks. And so we've got components of environmental DNA assessment where we're actually doing a method study within these wetlands. We're also looking at binocular assisted visual surveys. We're using drones or small unmanned aerial systems. And then we're working with a partner, Laura Spate, on some canid scent surveys to see if we can use detector dogs to sniff them out. One of the really important things that we've also launched is our citizen science reporting tool, where people can actually go online and upload photos or upload information about sightings that they may have either in their backyards or, while they're driving around on the road and whatnot. And I'm going to put a shameless plug for that here in a couple of minutes. But then we've also been applying some more traditional techniques. So these walking surveys, road surveys, trapping surveys using various trapping methods. So some of your more standard and traditional techniques for herpetological surveys and especially aquatic turtle surveys. So the goal here is that we're trying to sample as many sites as possible throughout the historic range. And what we've done is we've applied a randomized site design in order to establish sampling locations across East Texas. So we have downloaded a lot of information and combed through the literature and available information out there for historic account locations. And then around those historic account locations, we have used what's called the NWI, the National Wetland Inventory, to establish areas where potential wetland habitat exists in those zones around the historic accounts. Then we've used ArcGIS to randomly populate sites within those areas. And we're prioritizing the top wetland types that we know the species tends to prefer. Aside from the sites that we've generated around these historic accounts, we're also populating random site locations that are in counties that do not have historic accounts, as well as in areas where there was not a historic account, but the county itself may have had a record. And then once we've established these sampling locations, we're using as many methods paired as possible so that we can do a comparison to make suggestions towards what might actually be the best way to detect the species here in Texas. And so quickly here, I'm just going to go through some of the results that we've had to date. We are currently we're starting year 3 of our 3-year study. So we're in our final sampling season. So across 2020 and 2021, we've conducted a total of 239 sampling events at 54 sites covering 29 counties. And what you see in this map here, those green counties represent the counties where we know are part of the historic range of the species, but we've started updating those counties with more recent records. So these purple counties that are on here are where the species has been documented since 2008. The yellow counties on here represents counties where they've been documented since 2015. And then these pink counties on here actually represent the counties where they've been detected within the current study. So whether 2020 or 2021. Environmental DNA sampling has been kind of our primary method for initial detection of the species. And we've had positive detections at 11 sites, which are represented by those solid black stars on the map. And then we've had potential detections at 7 different sites, which are represented by those hollow stars on the map. A positive detection we consider whenever we have multiple sampling events or multiple sample types where a chicken turtle DNA has been picked up in our PCR. And then these potential detections are where we've maybe only had one sample or one replicate where that genetic material has occurred. For our binocular assisted visual surveys, we've had an incredible team of field technicians out conducting over 13,000 minutes of visual surveys across the 2 years. And these surveys have resulted in 13 observations of Western chicken turtles across 2 different sites in East Texas. Our road surveys, we've been conducting those kind of opportunistically as we drive between sites and between sampling locations in Texas. So we've covered over 560 miles with just over 1,600 minutes of observation. And those have also resulted in 2 observations of Western chicken turtles throughout East Texas. We have a graduate student who's working on the project, and he's assessing the use of these small unmanned aerial systems or drones for evaluating aquatic turtle population size and composition. And he's emphasizing the Western chicken turtle. And so far, he has flown at 7 different sites in 2021 and collected over 25,000 images with 939 minutes of video imagery. And his efforts have to date resulted in 2 observations of Western chicken turtles at 1 site. But I'm sure you can imagine if a lot of your imagery looks like this image, where all of those kind of lighter colored dots that are on that picture represent an individual or a different turtle, it's going to take him some time to actually get through the rest of that imagery and that video footage. So we're hoping that those numbers will increase as he gets through the rest of that data analysis. Our canid scent surveys have resulted in just under 500 minutes of survey time with Western chicken turtles confirmed at 2 different locations. We salvaged the carcass of 1 individual at 1 site in 2020. And then in 2021, Rain, who's the dog there in that photo, actually did find and detect a Western chicken turtle at another site. She actually ran up to Laura there with the turtle in her mouth. She was very excited to have found that there. And then our online reporting tool that I mentioned earlier has really been super helpful, especially for citizen science reports. To date, we've received 33 different reports across East Texas. And with that online reporting tool, we actually have an option where you can upload photographs of the individual so we can confirm whether or not that is truly a Western chicken turtle. And so far, 7 of those 33 reports have been verified as Western chicken turtles via photos. What's nice about those photos too, though, is that if you upload those, we can verify that identification. And so actually so far, 2 of those 33 reports have actually turned out to not be Western chicken turtles. They've both been melanistic red ear sliders. So red ear sliders that have lost that coloration on the ear there. Here's my shameless plug for the online reporting tool for you guys. I've got a couple of different ways that you can access it. That short link that's up there in the top right is one way that you can do that. You can also scan that QR code there and actually access the reporting tool directly from your mobile device. And then we also have a link directly on the project website on our web page. And that link is down there at the bottom of the page. And I'm going to take a second here to pause to see if there's any questions about our chicken turtle project before I start moving on to some of the dinosaurs that we've been sampling here in Texas.
Anybody have any questions?
Everybody good?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I
Clear as
got
mud,
a
right?
question, Andy.
What was that?
This is Ruben. Paul Crump was telling us when we did a few surveys for him on Alabama Creek and Alizan, that they tend to be only active, I guess, early spring or late winter, that window. And I was just wondering, those sites that citizens or just regular people were observing them, or that Laura was detecting, was it outside of that optimal time frame?
Yeah, so we're trying to figure out some more of that seasonality that Paul mentioned, and he is correct. They do seem to be mostly active from that kind of March through May or June period. So that's our active sampling window for the project. I have, though, received photo verified reports of Western chicken turtles from almost every single month of the year. And we have conducted some annual sampling at each of our different control sites where we know that there are populations, and have observed them outside of that kind of known activity window. So it's raising some interesting questions as to how active they truly are. And there are some researchers at Texas A&M College Station who are conducting radio telemetry surveys, and they've told me that, even when they're out there during the most active time period, they've also found them buried during that window in the ground. So lots more questions really than answers, if that, helps out. Okay, great. I'm going to move on unless anybody else has any other questions. Let's talk about some charismatic megafauna that we have here in Texas. Alligator snapping turtles here range pretty much throughout the same area as Western chicken turtles, but they exhibit or they occupy a very different type of niche. They are typically found in these kind of deeper, slow-moving freshwater bodies that are associated with rivers and really seem to like some of the reservoirs, some of the oxbow systems. But that being said, they also occupy some pretty flashy areas. One of the better studied populations here in Texas is actually here in Buffalo Bayou in Houston, where that system can fluctuate wildly depending on the amount of rainfall that we get. And there's over 100 individuals within that population alone. So kind of a wide range and broader area to find these guys. But there are species that's known to rarely bask, and they're considered generally nocturnal in their activities, and they spend most of their time submerged. All of that being said, though, I have received reports from people and photographs from people of them crossing the road in the middle of the day or basking on a log as juveniles or subadults. And then, actually walking across on land. So they do seem to move around a lot more than was originally perceived. But the alligator snapping turtle is considered a threatened species here in Texas and has been protected since, I believe, the 70s. And so their populations do have a little bit more protections than the Western chicken turtle, which is not actually protected in any way so far in Texas. I put together this little guide to help everybody kind of identify some of these key characteristics on alligator snapping turtles. A lot of people will send me photos of what's actually a common snapping turtle because especially when they're younger, the two species can look somewhat similar. And so some of the things that you're looking for specifically with alligator snapping turtles is that they have this shorter neck with what's called fleshy tubercles. So it looks like they have these kind of long whiskers kind of coming off the backside of the neck there. And when I say short neck, the common snapping turtle, I don't know if anybody's ever come across one crossing the road, but if it's a turtle that can reach its head almost all the way around the backside of its body to bite you, that's a common snapping turtle. That's a very long neck. They also have these 3 distinct keels on their carapace that they retain throughout adulthood. Common snapping turtles, when they're younger and smaller, can have those 3 keels, but they tend to smooth out very quickly through age, whereas alligator snapping turtles keep those kind of sharper ridges, those kind of edges that run along the backside of their carapace. They also have a very large, wide head with a pointed snout in relation to their body. So when I say a large, wide head, a lot of people I've found in East Texas actually refer to these guys as loggerheads. And I can tell you, as somebody who's worked with loggerhead sea turtles, it really took me a little while to understand that they were talking about a completely different species when they were up in Northeast Texas and talking about a loggerhead. But their heads are very, very wide. And when you see them, they make this kind of triangular shape to where it comes to a very sharp point kind of at the snout where the nose is. Just like birds, we do refer to their mouth as a beak. And so they have this kind of hook at the front end of their beak. This front on view, if you come across one, is probably going to be the view that you get. That's their intimidation. And they will open their mouths. And there's 2 different things that you're looking for in an open mouth of an alligator snapping turtle after you're staying a good distance away. That first is that hooked beak at the top where it's got that kind of really sharp point. But then inside of the mouth, they have this biological adaptation with what's called a lingual lure. And so what they have is a fleshy protuberance off of their tongue that is actually colored and can be, it's vascularized. And so it can change colors over time. And it's either gray or bright pink. And what these guys do is once they hunker down, they'll open their mouths and move that lure around to entice prey into their mouths. It kind of looks like a worm. And so if a fish swims up, that's when they go to eat it. So these are just some of the characteristics. I could go into a lot more detail on them, but if anybody has a picture of something that they think is an alligator snapping turtle, I'm happy to take a look at that and, explain to you whether it is or isn't what we're looking for specifically on those. So the study that we're conducting here is essentially collecting baseline data for alligator snapping turtles here in Texas. This is a highly collaborative effort that's occurring between different ongoing studies here in Texas. And our assessment is 3 years. And so we're currently entering into the 2nd season now of this project. We have 4 primary objectives here. We're looking at abundance and demographics, population genetic structure, and we're also trying to put together a plan for training for future long-term surveys, whether that means actually having some people come out in the field with us and learn on a one-on-one basis what some of these techniques are, or putting together some sort of materials that folks can use as reference documents in order to develop their own long-term monitoring projects. And then we're also working with the Lower Neches Valley Authority to produce a web-based viewer for future research so that folks can see areas where alligator snapping turtles are present or where they have been sampled for but have not been found, and those types of things. But really our overall goal here on this project is to just fill the knowledge gap for the species, especially with that need that's been identified from the species status assessment with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So quickly here, I just want to build a little bit of a picture for you guys as far as how we've picked our locations and what some of my most recent needs are, because I could really use a lot of help from some of you guys in the room there. So this map here shows each of the different watersheds within Texas based on those TCEQ layers. And so what we've done is we've established areas where all of these different agencies, Stephen F. Austin University, Turtle Survival Alliance, Texas Turtles, Texas A&M Commerce, SWCA Environmental, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and then our partner agency, Tangled Bank Conservation, are conducting or have conducted ongoing surveys for the species. And then from there, we've added all of these different historic accounts, whether they're anecdotal records or just conversations that we've had with local fishermen, compiling what I'm calling local ecological knowledge from individuals who have been in areas for a very long time and might be more knowledgeable in a certain area than I am. And so we are aiming to sample within those kind of spaces between all of the stars or between all of those established sampling areas so that we can expand our knowledge about the species outside of areas that have already been studied. And if you guys can see up there, those kind of upper basins, the Red River, the Cypress, the Sulphur, there have been some attempted sampling events up in those areas, but those basins are some of our less populated zones. And so if anybody from those basins specifically, or even the Upper Trinity River Authority into the Brazos watershed have any anecdotal observations, photographs, a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy that saw one, I'm happy to take any kind of recommendations for areas that we could check out or, potentially trap at for some reconnaissance. Quickly, just going through some of our results so far, we have sampled 26 sites over 2021 with almost 600 trap nights at all of those sites. We've been able to sample so far in 9 of the 11 East Texas basins. The Sulphur Basin is actually one that we still have yet to find a site to establish with either AST occupancy or potential occupancy. We've captured 51 individuals across 14 different sites in these basins, and we've caught them within the Cypress, the Neches, the Sabine, the San Jacinto, and the Trinity basins. Our largest individual was over 600 millimeters straight carapace length and weighed approximately 58.6 kilograms, which is just about 125 pounds. It was a big boy. And then our smallest one so far has been a little juvenile that was just under 100 millimeters and very, very small, kind of the size of a coffee mug or something like that. We've been able to capture 11 females, 21 males, and 15 juveniles. So actually a pretty good spread across the mature adults as well as juveniles and subadults in the study so far. So some of our project plans for both of these, we're in the final season for our Western Chicken Turtle project. Like I mentioned, we're implementing some additional methods at new locations and also confirming presence at sites that had either positive or potential detections in 2020 and 2021. And we're allowing continued access to that citizen science-based reporting tool. So I'm actually within the next day or two fixing to send out a blast email to everybody. We've really relied on word of mouth, social media, sharing with friends and family information and links about this reporting tool. So if I don't have anybody's email address in the room and you want to provide that to me, I'm happy to also send you that email with the links and everything too. We're continuing to compile historic accounts for both species, and we are using sources such as VertNet, iNaturalist, collection records from different museums, as well as just anecdotal records from conversations that we've had with individuals. And then for alligator snapping turtles specifically, we're going to continue some more of this reconnaissance trapping in those upper basins that I mentioned, as well as the Brazos River Basin. We did have a record wet year in 2021, so that is going to make us go back to a few sites where we may not have captured ASTs, but felt pretty confident that they were present. And so far, we have a few sites where we've revisited them multiple times within the calendar year and had incidences of false negatives. So we've caught an AST at that site at one event, but then at a second event, we have not caught any ASTs. And so that's interesting to me and should have some interesting implications for seasonality for this species as well. And so with that, I know I just threw a whole lot of information at you guys, and I really just kind of blew through that really quickly, but I'd like to thank all of our just myriad, field personnel, volunteers, our researchers, our collaborators, our partners. We've worked extensively with a lot of different private landowners within the state too, to access property or access areas within their properties. And my contact information is up there at the top right of the slide. If anybody has any questions that we can't address right now or has any information that they want to share with me. And with that, I'll take any questions that people have.
We have any in the room?
One quick question, eDNA for the alligator snapping turtles, is that part of the project?
Can you hear that, Mandy, or need to repeat it?
I heard eDNA, but then I heard alligator snapping turtle.
Okay.
Yeah, was it just, it didn't look like the project included eDNA for alligator snapping turtles. I didn't know if that was feasible or not.
Are you doing eDNA monitoring for the alligator snapping turtles?
So currently we're not doing any eDNA monitoring for alligator snapping turtles. Stephen F. Austin University did do a small project last year with environmental DNA, and they found kind of a 50% detection rate in areas where they know that they're occupied. So there's a few things that need to be worked out. We have worked with a few folks to develop some potential plans for environmental DNA with ASTs and continued monitoring with chicken turtles, but nothing eDNA related has come to fruition yet with ASTs for our project.
Okay.
I see a lot of different logos on this screen and earlier, trying to figure out who else is out in the field, especially in the Cypress Basin, other than you and your team.
So Laura Ashley was asking if you had any other partners working in the Cypress in addition to your team. I guess Laura Spate with the dogs.
I just don't know which one of these.
I know SFA.
SFA is working in the Cypress, Mandy's team. Are any of the other organizations listed?
So in the Cypress specifically, Stephen F. Austin, our group, and then a few private landowners that we've worked with within the Cypress are about the extent of it. Texas A&M Commerce actually has been doing a lot of work around the Cooper WMA area in the Sulphur Basin. And then they've also done some work up in the Red River Basin right around Texarkana. But really it's from what I can tell and from what I've learned from a lot of the folks that are working in the Cypress Basin, a lot of those detections are occurring in the far eastern regions of the basin. And so there's not anybody that I've talked to as of yet who's doing work out in the western reaches of the basin that have, verified accounts or reports or anything like that.
Any others? Well, Mandy, we really do appreciate your presentation and hope you have a good day in the field. And then I've got to do my shameless plug for the turtle in my yard from last year. So
I was gonna say, I wanted to let you tell that story again too. So no, thank you guys, everybody, so much. Sorry I have to run out like this, but please, by all means, shoot me an email, give me a phone call. I'm happy to talk turtle anytime with anybody that's here. So
thank you, Mandy.
Thank you, Mandy.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So, hey, Angie, will you unmute and so I can confirm that you can see the presentations?
Sorry, yes, I'm unmuted now.
Okay. I just want to, I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to try to do this correct today. Yesterday we had the sulfur and I kept forgetting to share the screen so the people online couldn't see our presentation. Can you see that okay now?
It's showing your screen sharing, but it's still black. There we go. Yeah.
Okay. And let's see if come on. Slideshow will pop up. Okay, we're on the slideshow. Is that a full screen for you?
I'm still seeing your PowerPoint view.
Okay. Give it just a second. And it hasn't gone to just a full screen.
It just now did.
Okay. Can you see the laser pointer?
Yes.
All right. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this has been fun for me. Yesterday we had the Sulphur River Basin meeting and doing a hybrid, and this is my first time to lead a hybrid meeting, and fine with PowerPoint over Zoom, but to run both, you've got to remember to screen share, and some morons kind of slow to remember things like that. So I think we finally got that. So anyway, my name's Randy Russian. I'm with Water Monitoring Solutions. We're NETMWD's CRP contractor. We've been working with in the basin for about 15 years. Today, I'm going to talk about our basin highlight report. Normally, I stand up and talk and I walk around a lot, so I'm kind of tethered to the laptop to try to present to both this group and the people online. So bear with me on that. So for the folks, I guess most people are familiar with the Cypress Basin, but if you're not, we have generally watersheds. The main Big Cypress Creek, you've got the upper watershed with Lake Cypress Springs, Lake Bob Sandlin, City of Mount Pleasant is here. That water flows into Lake of the Pines, so that's one of our primary watersheds. And this one we'll talk about today. Then we have the Black Cypress Bayou watershed. It also feeds into the Caddo Lake. And then we have the Little Cypress. This watershed is kind of around Pittsburgh and Gilmer and that area, and also comes into Caddo. And then we have Caddo Lake, which we've talked about in other reports extensively. This is, in fact, I'm going there next month to sample, and I can't wait. We're staying all weekend. And it's just gorgeous. If you haven't visited Caddo Lake, I highly encourage you to go there. It is a gem in our state. And and then we have the James and Black Bayou watersheds that are at the Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana border. So Black Bayou flows below the city of Atlanta, Texas, not to get confused. And then also we have the James Bayou, which comes through. This actually goes into Louisiana and then flows into Caddo Lake. So that's just an overview of the subwatersheds. Okay. So when we look at the 2020 integrated report, this shows quite a number of impairments on the 303D list. And I know it's probably hard for y'all to see in the back of the room, but primarily we have low dissolved oxygen and high bacteria. We've done some studies, recreational use abatement studies, to try to get some of those E. coli or bacteria impairments removed. Some of that's been accepted by the state, still waiting on EPA. So Carly's here and she's probably going, don't put that slide up there, but the 2022 integrated report draft, this is not a final, but this is on the TCQ's website for comment. It looks like the low DO for Hughes Creek is going to be coming off of the impairment list. And added to it will be a couple of watersheds for bacteria or E. coli, and South Lily Creek for low DO. I will state that South Lily is a intermittent stream with perennial pools, and over the years we can be in a drought and the creek is completely full, and we can have plenty of rain and the creek's pretty much dry. It's this stream is just odd. I haven't figured it out yet. In fact, when I was there in October, there was, and in January, there was no flow. We measured zero velocity with the meter, and I'm in 3 feet of water. So explain it to me, please, someone much more knowledgeable than me. So this is an overview of the Lake of the Pines watershed. I'm going to talk a lot about Lake Bob Sandlin, Tankersley Creek, which is on the western boundary of Mount Pleasant, and Hart Creek, that's on the eastern boundary of Mount Pleasant. These are tributary streams. Big Cypress Creek flows all the way into Lake of the Pines. And thank you, Nelson Roach, for allowing us to monitor at this station right in the middle of the creek, of that watershed. We've gone for many years without any data between Highway 11 way up here and US 259 down here. So Mr. Roach allows us on his property to come out and take those samples. And this is a very important data point for us. So this year we started throwing in the US Drought Monitor. This is over the past 20 years. The darker the color, the heavier, the more significant the drought period is. You can see the 2005-06 drought, and then there's the 2011-12 drought. And these are the 2011-12 drought, correct me if I'm wrong, well, it's not the drought of record, it's still the 1950s for this area.
That's true, but we're still doing analysis to see if that changes.
Okay, because this one is, for some areas, it was without a doubt the drought of record, and others, it's the 1950s is still the drought of record. It was.
And we are going to say that the drought in the 2004 to 6 timeframe was worse in severity than the drought of record. It just didn't last as long, so that's why we don't refer to it. So if you ask me for a singular when it's as bad as it has ever been, that's in the 2004 to 6 timeframe. But for the duration of about 48 months is what was bad times in the 1950s.
Thank you for clarifying that. I will show you. Walt was just like the perfect segue for me. This is the rainfall from Lake Bob Sandlin, and this is 2005. This is the least amount of rain that we've had in the watershed, or the upper portion of the basin, going back since to 1979. Then what I wanted to point out are these boxes down at the bottom. These are the releases from Lake Bob Sandlin. Lake Bob Sandlin does not have any in-stream flow requirements. And so it only releases they only release water to maintain freeboard or to prevent damage to their dam. So otherwise they hold the water. Well, when we look at since 2000, there's 7 years that zero water left that reservoir. And this, we see water quality impacts in Tankersley Creek and Hart Creek and Big Cypress Creek as a result of not having that additional freshwater inflow. You can see we had record rainfalls and releases in 15 and on into current time period. And as Mandy mentioned, last year we had a very wet spring and early summer, but the rest of the year was very dry. And so you can see that the releases weren't near as high as it had been the previous few years.
Randy, can I supplement
Sure.
that by saying in calendar year 22,
Mm-hmm.
the gates have been closed at Lake Bob Sandlin, and they are still this morning more than a foot below full. What I want to say about Lake of the Pines, or actually, is every single day in 22, we release out of stored water from the district the optimum environmental flow release amount. And that caused us during this dry episode to be about 4 or 5% below full. Well, as of the rains this week, we got back to full. So if you get on the computer this morning, Lake of the Pines is full, and upstream from us, Bob Sandlin is about a little over a foot, and all that separates Sandlin and Cypress is the dam. Cypress is a little more than 2 feet below full. So one of the things we have to take notice of is it's not like pour it out and it goes first to the lake, first lake that most upstream and gets full and then down. That's not how this basin works. The way this basin works with Lake of the Pines in the middle, we can get direct rain runoff that never went to either of those further upstream lakes. So that's how they can be less than full, even with their gates closed for all of this year so far, that we can open our gates. We can provide for the downstream areas, including Caddo Lake, and still in one heavy good rain, jump 6 to 8 inches in elevation in a fairly short period of time at Lake of the Pines. And that may be more volume. I recognize that this is about quality, but I thank you for seeing the link between stopping the flow and water quality, because those two topics, sometimes we think of them separately, and we ought to think of them together.
All right. And kind of a segue again. Well, this is great. It's like we practice this, right? To point out, here's 2021 for releases from Lake Bob Sandlin. These are in acre feet. And the last time they released was in June of last year. And to your point, there have not been any releases this year. And it looks like it's going to take some very significant rain to fill those.
And say that the Lake Bob Sandlin fell below full sooner than Lake of the Pines did, and more severely than Lake of the Pines did. The number that you see there in 21 of 15, the number we released, Laura, for the environment in 22, and we're still in the third month of 22. That volume is a number that's approximately double that 15. So at a time when our upstream lake has shut off the gate and there's no direct flow, it is true to say that what they release is not necessarily what we would use to make the releases to Caddo Lake. We would use the inflow from all of the watershed, not just that part that is trapped in Lake Bob Sandlin, but by size. I'm telling you that the 15 in June approximates half of what has been released so far in January, February, and so far in March from Lake of the Pines.
So we're saying Lake of the Pines is more influenced by rainfall than some of the other reservoirs in the basin.
We are the beneficiaries of a greater area that when it does rain, it does get to the lake. So yes, I'm going to call that drainage area. Okay, the drainage area of Lake of the Pines is several hundred square miles that are never going to contribute to Bob Sandlin or Lake Cypress Springs, because they are up the river, but their drainage area is so much more compact. It's easier for them to sustain a hit and miss rain event. It's more difficult for us to not get flow from a scattered rain event. Or said another way, it's fairly easy for a rain event to miss helping Lake Bob Sandlin. It's much more difficult for, if there is rain, for it not to have some kind of consequence to Lake of the Pines. Now I know that's not scientific for it, so scold me a little bit, but I'm going to say that, try to say it in regular words.
And the other thing is Lake of the Pines is a flood control reservoir. So it was designed to catch all of this water, so it has a much bigger watershed, including the water coming out of those lakes. So Lake Bob Sandlin, at times when they release, they may release 20,000 cubic feet a second or more. And they just dump it on us. Lake of the Pines is able to buffer and catch that water and then release it over time. So by an example, they can release 20+ thousand. We can only release just a little over 3,000 cubic feet a second. So we hold that water and release it over time to Caddo to try to keep the flood water as low as we can. Now, Caddo's influenced by other tributaries that don't have dams, so that's a whole other conversation for another meeting, but just kind of background information. Sorry, Randy.
No, that's, y'all are making this easy on me. Actually, I mean, it's, again, perfect segue. So when we talk about Big Cypress Creek, there are only, there are two primary tributaries in the upper portion of the creek. You've got discharge from the Pilgrim's Pride plant in Tankersley and one from the city of Mount Pleasant into Hart. Then you have contributions from city of Pittsburgh and some other smaller municipalities, and Robert will talk about that in a minute. But what I want to point out is in the integrated reports, we have concerns for nutrients and resulting chlorophyll, which is really interesting when you think about it. The nutrients are no surprise since it's related to effluent. But without the releases from Lake Bob Sandlin, the stream becomes effluent dominated. And of course, we have an area that has low relief, so we have a lot of low flow here when we don't have rain. And therefore, the chlorophyll has values are high enough to have a concern for the stream standards. And that I find the most interesting part about that, because chlorophyll usually aren't a concern in stream segments, they are in reservoir segments. And what that means is there's not enough flow that's giving enough residency time for the algae to take advantage of those nutrients and produce at a level that surpasses our screening levels.
I think it's also noting that photo that's typical. It's also surprising that chlorophyll being high in the sense that water is very turbid.
That is a valid point. Yeah, I mean, you don't see a lot of flow or SECI transparency greater than maybe 0.3 of a meter, 0.4 of a meter. However, that I will state that when it is low flow and we go to the Roach property down there, that water is extremely clear and it's there. But yeah, here at Highway 11, it usually seems to be much more turbid. And I don't have a reason for that. And this wasn't a flood flow or just after a rain event photo. So I would say more ambient. Anyway, with that, and then I'll go into some focus on Lake of the Pines. In the 2020 integrated report, the three lower assessment units, Lake of the Pines divided into 4 assessment units, and the 4th one being way up near the headwaters. All the 3 lower ones have a high pH impairment. This impairment, I believe, was in 2016, was first impaired, which kind of blew my mind. East Texas has low pH or neutral pH, not high. So the pH criterion on the high end is 8.5 units. So that was, it came as a surprise to me, quite honestly. We see that the reservoir is eutrophic and it's ranked in the top 3rd for chlorophyll A in the state. So that's out of 137, do you remember? 100, under 140 reservoirs roughly. So in the 2019 Basin Summary Report, and the Basin Summaries where we do a lot of statistical analysis and really dig deeply into the data, we had found, I don't know that it's the correct terminology, but it very significant trends. T-stats are usually our criteria for evaluating a value as significant. We look for a T-stat of 2 or greater, and we want a p-value of less than 0.1. And so here we have a T-stat of 4.3 and a p-value of 0, and on this upper middle assessment unit 7.2. So highly significant. That came as a kind of a alarm bells to us. And then when we just kind of plotted, this is over time, we plotted all the different assessment units. And you'll notice the yellow 04 rarely was above the criterion. And you start to see that assessment unit 1, which is blue, is in the dam. Assessment unit 2, which is kind of the lower middle. You're starting to see a lot more of these. And then as we move further down, you're starting to see assessment unit 3. And it's like, well, what's going on here? Well, in previous summary reports, we had found significant trends for chlorophyll increasing in the reservoir. And so that kind of triggered the thought, well, is this high pH a result of eutrophication, a result of algae? Well, primary producers, we'll use that term. Is it a result of primary productivity and consuming the available nutrients and producing oxygen as a result, increasing pH? And I'll go into that. And so what we did, TCQ doesn't record percent saturation in the database in SWCLMIS. So what we did was did the reverse math. So you take milligrams per liter or concentration and take out the temperature and that to get to percent saturation. So for, if you're not familiar, the way a DO sensor works, it actually measures the partial pressure of oxygen in the water column, and partial pressure and percent saturation have a direct relationship. So once we have percent saturation, which that's affected by barometric pressure, how much atmospheric pressure you can concentrate in the water column. So once we know that, we take temperature and salinity in an algorithm to calculate milligrams per liter or concentration. All that's in the database is concentration, but that's so variable based upon temperature in our area. And I want to just use percent saturation to know if the water is saturated, is below saturation, saturated, or super saturated. And when we pulled out the percent saturation data and related it to pH, you'll see that all of the high pH values were collected when DO was 100% or greater. Now, some could argue, yeah, percent saturation being high may not be due exclusively or at all to primary productivity or algae. It could be to wind activity or some other source. But when we pulled the data from the USGS gauge, it's at the dam at Lake of the Pines, the wind speed on average is about 4 miles per hour. Now that's over a 2-year period, and that's every 15 minutes. So there were higher wind speeds, but I don't think you can say that wind in general would regularly cause DO to go above 120% saturation, which was very common in Lake of the Pines in the historic data that we looked at. I think this was the report was in 2019, so we were looking at data from probably 2018, 17 back to 2000. So get into my assumption was the high pH is due to primary productivity. So the algae will consume all the available carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. Once that carbon dioxide is consumed in their production to produce oxygen, then there is a weakly bonded acid called carbonic acid that naturally forms in water bodies. And the carbon dioxide from that carbonic acid will break apart. The algae are able to consume that CO2 and produce oxygen. What happens then is this acid is being consumed, it's breaking apart, therefore pH is increasing as a result of this primary productivity. And then also oxygen is going to increase because that's the byproduct of photosynthesis. At night, when the algae are not able to do photosynthesis, they are still going through respiration, just like us. So they're taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide back into the water column. Then that carbon dioxide will form with the hydrogen ions to produce carbonic acid at night. So we're all familiar with a diel change of DO increasing in sunlight and decreasing, but pH will follow a similar trend. So that was our assumption when we started the study. And the TCEQ provided us funding for a special study in Lake of the Pines. And actually there are two. There's one that were continuous monitors in the upper portion of the reservoir. And then the other was a diel study where we did 24-hour SON. We deploy the SON. So I'm going to talk about both of them separately, although they intertwine into the total project study. When we look at the map, NETMWD has a continuous monitor up here at Highway 259 bridge. And technically this site is a riverine site. It's actually in 404 in Big Cypress Creek. But since this is the area that begins the upper assessment unit, AU04, we said we'll let this represent that upper portion of the assessment unit. The second continuous monitor that NETMWD has is at their intake structure, which is an assessment unit 3. It's actually, it's not exactly co-located with where the region monitors on their regular monitoring, but it's really close. And so we use this to represent the third assessment unit or the upper middle. For the diel studies, we discussed with TCQ of deploying SON somewhere near the shore where we wouldn't have to go get permission from Army Corps and put out some sort of structure to attach the SONs. So these data are not considered as part of the assessment because they're not exactly representative of their assessment unit. This is the City of Longview intake structure. This is the site where the region office monitors for their regular monitoring. And so, but we do have something relatively close. And then down at the dam, we put a site in the swim part for our diel, and the region office is more in the open water where they monitor. So kind of give you an overview of the map. So our objectives were to look at pH and DO data and chlorophyll from the continuous monitors and from the region sampling. One of the things we want to do is identify water quality issues, such as we have any low DOs, because fish kills are really common. Whenever you have these super high DOs and super low, they'll have big spikes in the diel cycle, and that causes a lot of stress on fish. So we wanted to look at that. We wanted to look at what those ranges are. Are we seeing 20% saturation change? Or are we seeing 100% saturation range? And pH, how many units is that going? Because remember, pH is a logarithmic base 10 scale. So from going from a pH 8 is 10 times higher than a pH 7, and a pH 9 is 100 times higher than a pH 7. So we want to look what are those ranges, because that could also be stressors for fish. And I know for Walt, talking with him, that can also affect their treatment processes at the water plant. So both the NETMWD and the City of Longview have intakes. So that information could affect how they have to treat drinking water, and could add a lot of cost as well, and chemicals. Then we looked at statistical relationships, and we wanted to compare with the region data. These are the two continuous sites. So we have the Lake of the Pines 259 bridge, and at the drinking water intake plant place for NETMWD. These have SONs installed. They stay out and they record every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I will point, this is one visit, and you can see this ledge right here. It's not much of a ledge. Well, the lake was greater than full. Robert and I were out a month or so ago, and the lake was full. It was right at 100%, right at conservation, and that ledge was about 2.5, 3 feet from the water level. So it was kind of fun for my old and not so fit body to try to get up onto that ledge. We have visited there where we didn't even have to stand up in the boat to access the Sond. The lake, it was so high.
You paddled a kayak.
I paddled a kayak on, yeah, actually, to go back, I paddled a kayak onto here, and I was in a foot of water. So, but we've seen some changes. I've got a cool slide on that. So this is the sondes we're using, is they're the YSI XO2. They have a central wiper, and I'm going to use a real technical term here, so bear with me. There's a bunch of goo on the probes, and but if you'll notice how gooey the probes are, all of the probe faces, the sensor faces where the measurement point are occurring, they're all clean. And we had this experience throughout the entire study period. I was really impressed. Also mentioning lake levels, and Walt had alluded to that. Lake of the Pines has 2 conservation pools. We have a summer pool and a summer rec pool. Recreational pool, and then you have your, I guess, regular pool. So we have 228.5 and 230. So this yellow line represents a full pool. And you'll notice that the entire time we did the study, the lake was full or well above full. So this made for some challenges. If you'll remember, go back. These sondes are at a fixed depth. The sonde's not moving up and down with the reservoir. It's not a buoy. And so it made for some challenges that sometimes our sondes are very submerged underwater. Like, we'd love to have them at less than 1 meter below the surface. Sometimes we're 2 meters below the surface because of the lake level changes. To give you an example, and Mandy had mentioned this last summer. So this is over by the city of Longview's intake structure. We have the boat road marker. We got the egret up here hanging out. You can see there, I come back the next month, and the same boat road marker, the lake had come down about 1 foot. I can imagine how much fun that would have been with your really nice, expensive bass boat, just because you wouldn't have been able to see that marker a month before that. We had planned to go a second time in May, in late May, but we couldn't even get anywhere near where we needed to go to launch or get on the lake. So that was pretty wild. That came up, I believe, 8 feet in a matter of days. And it took, if you'll go back, it took a good 2 months to come back down. As had been mentioned, Lake of the Pines was built for flood control, and because city of Jefferson kept flooding. And so in the late 40s, early 50s, I think it's, would you say about a year, less than 2 years for Congress, the US Congress, to pass the funding and approval of the construction, right?
I'm going to say the 1940s was a period of wet, and the federal interest was managing times of wet. 1950s was totally opposite. In the 1950s, when drought dominated, it was easy to forget the 1940s, but the federal government built these lakes, many of them, because of the drastic experiences of the 1940s. And in the 1940s, Jefferson, if you're familiar with where the courthouse is in downtown street, 6 to 8 feet was standing in those streets. So you could use a boat to go from the courthouse through most of downtown. We have some antiquated pictures that show that. It's easy to forget that this lake, while it has multiple purposes, including recreation and water supply, the dominant reason for this lake was to capture the floodplain. So earlier when I was talking about its capability to be drought resistant, it's because it was designed to capture. It's not accidental that it has this capability that some of the other lakes don't have. But when we talk about variability, and that's why if you take another federal lake that was built in a different season, Jim Chapman Reservoir, it has a flood component too. But in Jim Chapman, we say the flood bottom starts at elevation 440, and less than 8 feet later, and that's all they have to retain the flood flow. At Lake of the Pines, the bottom starts at either 228.5 or 230, depending on the year, and goes all the way up to 249.5. So vertically, what we're talking about is from the floor of this room to the ceiling of this building. That's not even the distance that is Lake of the Pines' responsibility to hold back floodwaters for Jefferson. Jim Chapman wanted to get to the top of the doorway for the and why that's important is as we try to balance these things, water quality being one of them, we're going to see over time, all the time, a huge amount of fluctuation in Lake of the Pines and wet time. You can go back to the 1950s and track that elevation because it's all online. And what you're going to see is virtually all the variability is upward, not down. And a distance, when you're going up 20 feet, when you go up straight up 20 and you go out, you can imagine that that's several football fields out. So it's a huge amount. And what happens when we're in those kind of things in 21, in that upper zone from 155 ridge to 259, the vegetation has a real impact on water quality. But when you submerge it with 10 or 15 feet, a lot of its capability, at least temporarily. So then in those high flow times, water treatment becomes dominantly chemical, not dominantly natural. And that's just that's why if you're asking in a perfect world, I would prefer a world where there's less volatility so that the plants that cleanse the waterway can be functional all the time instead of most of the time. And I appreciate that this study is, you don't get to pick when you start the study. You don't get to only do it if it's perfect weather. So that picture that you're showing is just think about how different shoreline. When you see that triangle that's on that post, in literally a few weeks, the shoreline moved several football fields back and forth. That's another reason why we kind of care what is in the ring around the lake. Is that ring around the lake is influencing the condition of that water.
No, I think it's great information. Kind of follow your point. Golly, Walt, we should have gotten together ahead of time. We could have tag teamed this whole talk. Here are some of the data that were collected at the 259 bridge, and the orange being the pH value, blue being DO percent, and green being chlorophyll. And what I found most interesting is how these patterns emerged and how they follow similar trends. And so, especially considering that it's more or less a stream segment there. So this, we just peeled out the data, those peaks that were greater than, the pH was greater than 8.5 units and versus DO percent saturation. And you would see these are pH values 8.45. So they'd round up to 8.5 in the, if we were putting in the SWCM-IS. You'd see that in every case, DO was well over 100%, and a lot of times 150% or higher, represented by the blue. Similarly, at the NETMWD intake, now we have a lot more variability, that we're definitely in a lacustrine site, and we see similar trends with pH and DO through this whole area. And what is fascinating to me are some of these peaks and these ranges. Now, these are 15-minute data, so you're seeing, you know, high resolution data every 15 minutes for that time period. And you see DOs following similar trends, and we see chlorophylls following a lot similar trends. Now, this is a chlorophyll sensor, it's not grab data. So we can talk probably an hour about limitations of sensors, but I think it provided a good amount of information to support our thought process. We did run statistical analyses on these data. We did t-test and ANOVAs. One of the critiques about the univariate stats we ran is we had so many data points. I mean, we're talking at each station, well over 500,000 data points. Close, I think in total in this 22 months range, we had about 1.2 million data points in total. So you've got so many observations that we feel like, yeah, the regression and t-tests, the NOVAs, those were all significant, but maybe, you know, we had so many observations. Well, of course, they're significant. So what needs to be done is some pretty high-end multivariate analysis. It's a stepwise test. We don't have the software and capability to do those tests. And I had visited with some others about possibly doing that. If you know anybody who really wants to play with some data, I would love for them to look at this just out of curiosity. But I think from talking to some others that we might see that DO increases and then maybe an hour later pH starts to increase, or maybe chlorophyll increases, then you'd see DO and then pH. But that's, like I said, a stepwise multivariate analysis, and it's going to take some pretty high-end software and someone really knowledgeable to interpret those results as well. But the results certainly that we found provided a lot of support for what we were thinking going into this study. Similarly, if we took the high pH readings from that, I'm sorry, from this peaks, if we took these that were 8.5 or greater, which are these, we'll find that DO was regularly 120, 150% saturation at the same time. So this further indicates that these are related to chlorophyll or primary productivity. Did some just simple correlation, and you know, as the graphs show, we found very strong correlations between DO percent, SAT, and pH. That's not just the peaks that are greater than 8.5. This is all the data. So this would be these 58,000, 59,000 numbers, that's individual parameters. So we had 11 parameters that we were recording. So it'd be 59,000 times 11 data points and 52,000 times 11 data points. And we had very, very strong correlations between DO and percent saturation. We had correlations between chlorophyll and DO percent. And that, while they're not great or super high correlations, I will go back and interject. We didn't have control of the level. So had we been able to measure at, half a meter below the surface regularly, constantly, then I think these would be stronger and they may actually fall into more of a significant relationship. The fact that we had relationships I found impressive, and especially finding, I think, a pretty strong relationship given that we didn't have control of the level of the sensor. That 0.5, I think that's something of great interest, even at the stream site, at 259. So anyway, that's a lot of heavy math. And to go into Laura Ashley's organization, an Eagles reference. Are you with me so far from Life in the Fast Lane? Anyway, hopefully you're Miss Molly who's paying attention and you're not Miss Molly who's going to sleep. So then we have the DIEL study. And so this is the study where we looked at 24-hour DO. We had them out every 15 minutes. And in most cases, the signs were out somewhere around 48 hours. We had a couple of incidents where, well, we lost a sign. We found it, divers found it. So we lost some data here at the dam. And then we had a storm, had to pull up the sign pretty early was that Tropical Storm Laura? Is that right? Should be, you should remember, right? Yeah. So anyway, so we deployed from the intake from the markers, and we deployed at the swimming area from the markers. The signs were typically around a half a meter below the surface. So when we look at the data, now these data, you'll see the gray diamonds. This is the NETMWD. So basically we took the 15-minute data that was being recorded by the SON and added in the NETMWD SON data from that same time period to do the analyses. We found that there wasn't as good of a relationship at the 259 bridge with following the DIELs. But again, no surprise, it was right in that transition from riverine to lacustrine. But you can see we had really similar curves, and I found that interesting here. And then we looked at the percent of the readings that were high, that had high pH from our DIEL. And it's just, I still haven't figured out why, but so we have like 40%, 60% in June of 2029. We go into later June, not as much. And I'm thinking we had a lot of cloudy days in this 2020. And so we probably didn't have as much productivity. We get into 21, we start to see a lot more higher pH percent. When we get into July of 21, 94% of the data points were greater than 8.5 standard units. And at the Longview, 85% at the dam, 93. So we see a lot of the readings are high. Here's an interesting curve at the dam site. When we talked about a DIEL pH swing, here is a DIEL pH swing. We're starting out around 9, come up to 9.5, drop all the way to 7.5%, and then come back up to 9.5. That's over 2 points, 2 standard units. So that means this pH in that 48-hour cycles changed over 100 times, like from the lowest to the highest. The highest was 100 times greater than the lowest. So it's a pretty wide range. It wasn't as pronounced at the Longview intake. So if we looked at those ranges, here's 2.1 standard units, 2.4 standard units. Similarly at NETMWD's intake, 1.8 standard units. So we had some pretty big ranges. I think that fisheries folks probably would find that of interest and how that might have impacted the fishery. Then if we look again and compare DO percent to pH to say, what is that relationship? Again, you see a lot of the same DIEL curve for both parameters. So definitely they're interlinked. When we look at percent of high DO or high DO percent readings. You can see that a lot of these values that we obtained were greater than 100% saturation. And in July of 21, every single DO reading that we had, it was greater than 100% saturation at the Longview intake and 94% at the dam. So, and then we look at diel DO percent range from what's the lowest to the highest. And so we see over 100% down at the dam in August of last year, 92%. We're seeing, probably on average, well over 50 or 60%. So for the dam site, the DO ranged from 14% saturation, which would be well below 5 milligrams per liter, probably be closer to 1. And then it went to over 144%, which would, if you convert that to milligrams per liter, is probably closer to 9. So a huge change in DO in these events. So some are much greater than others. If you'll remember, these that are kind of low, these also, we didn't see pH really change a lot either. They are not go above 8.5. So here again, we can follow the DO percent and pH diel cycle. Unlike what I expected to see, which is kind of the same curve. Here's one day it's kind of flat. Next day it's greater, but then it doesn't tail off. It doesn't drop. It just kind of tails off. Those are just things that were interesting to me to see. But then let's correlate DO percent and pH, kind of like we did with the continuous monitors. And for those of you that don't do correlations, a perfect correlation is 1. Like these are completely directly related. And what we found were correlations in the 0.9s to right at 1, which is insane. I mean, you don't see this in environmental data. 0.5s and 0.6 were like, those two are correlated. These are good relationships. To see 0.9s, 0.99s, this is just over the top. These are direct, almost perfectly directly related. So our findings was that this increasing pH and the chlorophyll that we'd seen in the past with statistical analysis of data, these are most likely indications of eutrophication. We say these high pH at the continuous monitors, we didn't see that occur very often. And it may be that we're seeing the pH more towards the dam where the algae have had time to take advantage of the nutrients in the water. And it may be a factor of not keeping the son, perfectly below the surface at a fixed depth. That they're probably both is the right answer. Obviously, when we're thinking algae being the issue, we're not surprised to see that the highest pHs and the greatest ranges or changes through a day happened in the summer. That would be intuitive. Oh, sorry. DO and pH were strongly correlated. We have statistical relationships to support our thought that these are due to primary productivity or eutrophication. And our continuous data, we talk about this in the report, but the region had some sampling events that we were able to find, relatively decent relationships between their data and the continuous monitor. So they seem to support one another. And which means that offered more credence to the data from the continuous sites. And so I'll transition from the pH study and then we'll talk about biologicals. I have a couple of slides to show on that. Are there any questions on that part of this project before we go into biological?
Sorry, Randy. The state does vertical profiling of the dam.
Yes, at all 4 of their sites, they'll do vertical.
228 and a half is normal full top elevation.
So did you analyze any track data?
So we stuck to surface data. Well, we have 1.2 million data points. I'm not done with this in my mind. Robert can tell you it's pretty much every time we talk, that's just what I talk about for the last 3 or 4 years. And I want to look at that, and I'm thinking when we get into our next basin summary report, we'll kind of revisit profile data versus some of the data that were collected in this study. I think there's still a lot of questions left. And so I'm interested in whatever questions you have. Maybe those are things we need to explore.
Back in about 2000, when we did the team,
Uh-huh.
the photic zone I measured was about 2.5
How did you measure the photic zone? With a light meter? Okay.
and everything below that's dark.
Right.
And the DO fell off the cliff.
Yeah.
You know, when you get to that point. Bottom of that reservoir is in opposite.
Right.
Months at a time.
Right.
I'm curious if that's still the same.
Well, it is interesting that you talk about the TMDL, because the TMDL, the genesis of it was low DO. And now we're looking at high pH, which we think is due to high DO, or not really due to high DO, but we can use it as a corollary for primary productivity. So it's something that I've had in my head. I'm like, wait, we had low DO issues in the reservoir, but now I don't think we have low DO issues. And what has changed, and how has that changed? Why has that changed? There's a lot of unanswered questions that I'd like to explore going forward. It would be a great topic for a special study.
One of the things I want to point out is those 4 zones of lifetime, that stratification talking about that happened in occupancy deep water, those zones 3 and 4 are too shallow for it to occur. So in looking at it from a study standpoint, this lake, I would find value in understanding, because Longview's intake is in one zone of the lake, and ours is in another. And so it would be useful to know it, not just for the entirety of the lake, but in those segments.
Uh-huh.
that you talked about.
In the different assessment units, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you have a different dynamic going on in that water that, although it is lake, it's more riverine.
In yours, yeah, where you're at.
Where I'm at.
Yeah.
And it's not like that at Longview. So,
Right.
From a water provider standpoint, there's value in knowing that individually per zone.
That would be something definitely to explore in the next cycle. I just remember when we did our very first basin summary report for y'all in 2009, we were finding increasing trends for chlorophyll. And then the 2014, we started to see increasing trends both for chlorophyll and for pH. But it was down at the dam. And then the 2019, we're seeing increasing trends for pH and assessment unit 3, where your intake is, and in 2. So we're kind of seeing the chlorophyll build up, and now we're seeing pH trends, statistically significant trends. So I'm thinking in the 24 report of going back and looking at historic, the entire range of data, and then chopping it up in maybe the past 10 years and see if there are differences in those two. I think that would be interesting exercise. And I agree that looking at, I guess we could use SECI as an indicator of photic zone. I mean, it's not a perfect, but we can use it as a certainly a surrogate. And I think because I am, from my review of the data from Lake of the Pines, Secchi mean is somewhere around 0.7 to 0.75 meters. Yeah, around roughly 2 feet. So that would mean that the photic zone should be roughly 4 feet, right? It's roughly double. Yeah, so, yeah. So, yeah. I think that could be done. So if we move into the ALM, we did some work in aquatic life monitoring in Tankersley Creek, which is receiving water from Mount Pleasant. And we looked at habitat, benthos, fish. Unsurprising, all of the fish data were in the high category. Fish are evaluated on a regionalized index of biotic integrity, or IBI. And so East Texas is blessed with a very diverse fish population. And so it's not uncommon to find quite a number of species in each fish event. What this we found validated that the stream flow in Tankersley, despite being receiving water, supports a diverse fishery. The benthos, oh, and Roy walked out. Benthos were analyzed by Dr. Darville, and we found these to be pretty similar to what we commonly see in East Texas, which is an intermediate category. This intermediate category, TCEQ came up with their own regionalized benthos metrics recently. We ran the metrics running both statewide and regionalized values, and we found the pretty similar results for the benthos. And then habitat, we have a statewide approach or metrics for scoring our habitats. And East Texas always falls in intermediate. We went to this one station several years ago on Kelly Creek, and had there not been a road crossing, no one would even know there was a stream out there. It's a gorgeous site. There are no housing, no plants, nothing to impact that stream. It is as natural of a stream as I'd ever been in. And it scored in the intermediate. And that's because of the metrics that are scored are really geared towards, those pretty clear rocky bottoms, central Texas streams. I still feel like some of the regionalized benthic metrics are geared that way as well, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so East Texas streams are always going to fall in the intermediate. We're not going to get high or exceptional because of the way the scoring metrics are. And sadly, Michelle Blair is retired. She was our assessor, and she's heard me get on the soapbox 100 times about that. What was really cool and what was awesome is that Adam Wisnett was out here IDing our fish that we collected, and we found a couple of very uncommon fish for this area, spotted sucker and a harlequin darter. They had been captured they were in the Swickamias database over, historically, but very uncommonly. And we were very excited about finding these species. And then one of the things that we've been looking into are the Louisiana pigtoe mussel. The pigtoe is being studied and looking that it may be on the threatened or endangered list. Mussels have a portion of their life cycle, their glaucidia are they attach to a host fish. And there are 3 primary species of fish that it's been documented that their glaucidia are attached to the gills of those fish. 2 of them, we have the bullhead minnow, the blacktail shiner, and the redfin shiner. Yeah, it's either redfin or red. We haven't collected that one in this basin, but we have collected the bullhead and blacktail. One of the things I wanted to mention is that historically in the SWCM database, there weren't a lot of these species present in past collections. I mean, we're looking at 80s and 90s data as well as recent data. And at this site, we collected in one event almost as many of these host fish species. In one event at Tankersley Creek, we collected almost as many of those species that had been collected in the entire basin historically. And so what that told us was that we're awesome at fishing. It told us that, the old time we didn't have as good protocols and technology. Our electrofishers or shocking units are much more efficient. You have a lot more settings you can do and things that we hadn't been able to do in the past. And also in the past, I mean, way back in the dark ages, when I worked at the Region 5 office, we didn't have seining methods. We were still coming up with, should we seine? How do we seine? How long do we seine? And we didn't have that as a protocol. And we didn't even, we were experimenting with how long to shop for. Now we do 900 seconds of on time. So there wasn't, the methodologies and protocols weren't as well developed as they are now. And that made us just think, well, geez, if we're going to go try to look for pigtoe mussels, you've got to physically dig in the mud to look for them. How would the Cypress Creek Basin, how would we select those sites? Where would we even begin? And so we said, hey, if we start electrofishing and seining these basins that we think that there would be pigtoe, let's do something that's a much less expensive and less labor intensive by doing shocking events and seining events. We'll see how many of these host fish are there. And if there's a large presence of host fish, then the possibility for the Louisiana pigtoe is greater at that site. And if we go to a site and there's not many, then we should move that site down on the priority list, because if they don't have their host fish which is critical to their life cycle, then they're probably not present, or they're not present in abundance. So with that approach, we've gone to the TCEQ and asked for additional funding to go, and a lot of our watersheds in the upper part of Lake of the Pines watershed or Big Cypress Creek wanted to say, hey, what's going on here? And TCEQ has funded us for doing biologicals at 4 different additional stations. We had already had Hart Creek on our list for this year and next. And we already had Fraser, which is an ecoregion station or a least disturbed stream. So we wanted to look at those sites. And then TCEQ funded us for Boggy, Greasy, Prairie, and for our next series of studies. So we'll be doing a lot of biologicals over the next 2 summers. And with that, oh yeah, yes, sir.
Sabine River Authority, and they're looking for those same, I call them taxis. If mussels don't move so well. And so Bill Kirby at the Sabine River Authority called me a couple of weeks ago and told me that that makes a lot, what Randy just laid out, that makes sense to them too. So that you can anticipate for those of you that they're going to be looking for these taxi service too.
Yeah, I mean,
The Uber fish.
the Uber fish.
So the comptroller's office is also getting ready this fall, I think, to release RFPs for the same type of work in entirety of East Texas. So it's going to be interesting. There's going to be a lot of people looking for these host fish, it looks like, over the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think it's exciting because, I mean, the worst day in the field shocking fish is better than your best day sitting in the office. So I enjoy it, but that's all I had. And that talk went a long time.
Do you want to mention anything about like Cypress Springs? I mean, I know you're still planning.
I'm not really, because I don't have a lot of information just
Right,
yet.
yeah.
I think we'll,
Just say there's a study hopefully going to take place up there on nutrients, so that we'll know more detail probably by next year. We'll be into it, but we don't know a lot about the design of it and how we're going to go about it yet. But there's definitely interest by TCQ in looking at some more in-depth sampling of there.
yeah, I look forward to working on Cypress, but it is impaired for nutrient criteria. And so standards team is wanting to know more about that watershed. So, all right. If there's not any other questions on me, we'll go ahead and bring up the Neches River and Cypress Basin watershed restoration program by Weldon. Do you want to sit here and drive? Would that be easier for you? All right, let me get your PowerPoint up.
Maybe we'll take a quick break while he's setting this up.
Yeah. I have to go and share your.
Repeat all that. I didn't catch it all a while ago.
What's that?
You told me there's gonna be no math.
All right, let's see. Hey, Angie, if you're still on, can you see that screen?
Yes,
Okay.
the A&M Forest Service.
Yes, A&M Forest Service, and now I'm gonna. You see that? The full screen now?
1 second, there's a delay. Yes.
Okay. All right. We may take a couple of minutes then for everyone to go to the restroom, and then we'll come back for that for y'all on the online.
Sorry about that. Well,
Yeah, sorry, man.
hurry up, wait.
We had a lot of that talk went way long.
That was a lot of stuff to cover.
Yeah.
Talking about a million data points. It takes.
It was a lot of data.
You just want to show because those are cool graphs.
I like those graphs. They're pretty. It's pretty easy to demonstrate relations that way.
Yeah.
I'll show you. I'll go ahead and show you here. So this, I've got the laser pointer. If you want to point, the people at home will see that, and then you can see it here. And then you can either use the mouse or you can use the pointer pad. Yeah. So. All right. So, I mean, are your retirement announced?
Yeah, it's public.
It's public, okay. All right.
I'm gonna get to retire. Both my kids are getting married this year, one in June, one in November. So I think I'm gonna be father more grandfather sometime next year. Not too far. So I enjoyed work and I also enjoyed family. This might be my last one. Last cycle. We don't have anybody particularly involved yet, but we're looking. So,
Hey, boy. Good to see you. It's been a long time on that. Good. Good. Yeah. Sunny. Great. Kids are fun. Kids are interested with us. We are. It'll be a year next month. So there's a lot going on right now, but. You know. Oh, well, that's just like me. Okay, great.
Have you,
I have that happen. So my mother says,
Did
no,
y'all-
I don't want to.
you're talking to
You're
your-
great.
Burning up the road. for 20 years.
Uh,
That's what my wife did today.
Yeah.
Sure.
One of our friends after. So, stepmother,
Small people.
trying to tag.
And
in
then
this,
the next part,
and
taking
this is
care of the
the
older people.
Rural people. There's always details.
Wow. Well, that's. Yeah. We're figuring all that kind of stuff out. Yeah, my oldest
It's more.
cleaning out gutters.
Oh, really?
She loves to be on grid. The neighbors are like, wow. Well, she likes it. She's good at cleaning gutters and she likes. Sweeping water off the flat roof. And then I'm trying to find ways.
Programs.
Technology. Chores, jobs, and opportunities to earn washing the dog, breaking the yard.
A lot of weddings.
You know, they have little dollar figures. Incentives, and it's not much. Another day I was. Cat litter. She gives us $1. I'm gonna do it over $1. I was like, oh no. And math tutoring, so the older one, she is.
Okay.
Actually, the last 2 years.
So now, I think that's the 6th grader. needs
What's it
help.
like?
So the 8th grader, will pay you to tutor her. Comes out being hazard. She said, this is awful. Hazard pay, you gotta have the increase. I said, what are we talking? She's 15 an hour. I was like, what? $15 an hour? You're 13. You know, but hazard pay, I was like, I said, you did this. Maybe you're more of an entrepreneur than I thought. So they're learning some stuff, right? Yeah, they wouldn't have had to do anything.
What can I think of her last name? Brewer.
But not one of them. It's not, they're not different. Yeah. I got to visit Warren.
I'm so
Oh,
glad
yeah.
you're here.
Yeah.
And I was trying to like figure out the location for us, but part of me is thinking, you know.
She and my dad are close.
Trying to find the name of it.
It's funny, we bought a building in town.
But another thing that you do is
That same guy that's always
when
on
there's
the college,
topics
he had his own.
or other state agencies, all this data,
I wondered about that.
capacity, technological, staffing wise, to analyze and figure out what the heck it means. Or build like a database of all these unmet needs that you built in this database. And
They didn't have gas
people like,
And there was that picture.
Dell or the biggies, contribute their staff time and their systems to
Yeah.
trying to figure it out, you know, report back out.
All right.
Yeah, there's a lot of data.
I think we can get started here again in a second. Everybody.
Region, really.
If you want to sit or stand or what, I mean.
Kind of low, so I'll probably better sit so they can.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Find a funding source.
I'll sit right back here if you have any problems. Huh?
My brother raised.
Oh, no.
We know a guy.
You know a guy, Ray gonna do some.
Ray can do the stats?
Oh, yeah,
Really?
all right.
Woo.
Okay.
Sociology.
Okay.
So,
Graduate level
one of, I meant
stats.
to tell me, I'll call him,
Okay.
but one of Andy's sites,
He's got all
I saw
this.
the landowner.
Software.
Yeah, and Swanson's
I had a
landowner.
stats class
She was
since,
trapping there.
probably 93.
And
I'm gonna give Ray your-
she's
the phone number.
oh, man, he was great.
All right.
We left after.
He's always looking for little fun things to do.
But-
Okay. Well, that
So
keep him
this woman,
occupied.
Swanson's landowner, talked to her brother, who lives there, so. Alligators have to always working their way upstream. Their whole life. They can't go the other direction.
Yeah.
They're only working their way up.
This is
to
what
what
I
he
talk around
believes.
Right.
And pick up what they go up, and I thought, well, then they would all be where the paddlefish would be.
There'd be paddlefish below the spillway.
And we shot there,
Okay.
and I don't remember anybody seeing any turtles at all.
So that's the
When they shot.
value.
That's
of
all.
the-
I like that. Where do they go?
We know how they're going. And several of them went up the creek, several of them down. One of them went to 5
ASTs?
miles, yeah.
Went downstream?
5 miles down. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to tell
Set up
Skipper.
shop.
Gives me
Yeah.
something to tell Skipper. Dixie.
Yeah.
Not that he's gonna ever give us any money, but it gives me something to tell him.
Okay, everybody, I think we're gonna get started again. Weldon, we appreciate you coming and doing this for us, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, thanks for letting me come out. My name is Weldon Dent. Like I said, I'm a fuels program specialist. So I'm here today to talk to you about the Neches River and Cypress Basin Watershed Restoration Program. This is a prescribed fire grant that we offer through Texas A&M Forest Service. I'll just give a quick program overview and just update on where we're at with the grant for East Texas. So the grant is, we call it the NRCBW grant for short. It's passed through from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we administer the grant application process and distribution. The grant provides assistance to landowners who utilize prescribed fire for ecological restoration, ecological improvement, all within the Neches River and Cypress Basin watersheds. We intend for the grant to improve the water quality, quantity, and help control invasive species, as well as enhancing wildlife habitat. The grant, the way it operates is it reimburses landowners up to $22.50 per acre for prescribed burning. Each of these burns, so as with all of our prescribed fire grants in East Texas, each of the burns must be conducted by a TDA licensed, certified and insured prescribed burn manager. Whenever we're scoring the applications, we give priority to prescribed burn treatments that promote native ecosystem restoration, and also the ones that are in priority watershed protection zones and are near public lands for wildfire protection. This is our grant eligible area. So like I said, it's Cypress Basins and Cypress Basin water and Neches River watersheds. So for 2021, where we're at with the grant, we had 163 applicants and we were able to award 15 grants that for a total of 3,273 acres and $73,642 worth of reimbursement. We have 3 prescribed fire grants in East Texas. So this is as far as total amount of funding available, this is our smallest one. We have a CPP, which is our Community Protection Program grant through the U.S. Forest Service, and it covers all lands within 10 miles of national forest boundaries. And then we have SFAM, which is State Fire Assistance for Mitigation. If you're familiar with the old National Fire Plan grant, this is kind of the newer version of that. It covers counties in East Texas that have a community wildfire protection plan. For all of our grants in East Texas, we had 284 applications and we were able to award 81 grants for a little over 18,000, almost 18,250 acres. We have grants that are available statewide. Again, with the SFAM, it's for counties with CWPPs. So that's why we have some counties out in West Texas. Statewide, I think we have 43 CWPP counties. We're working to improve that and increase that area. As we get more counties with community wildfire protection plans, then we can add that to the SFAM grant. Most of the grants that we have are going to be from East Texas, though. So the grants that you see here, or the stars that you see with blue, red, or orange, were all in our CBW applications. We allow people to apply for more than one grant at a time, so we get some overlap with that. The ones that are in red are just for NRCBW. So these other ones, they were eligible for one or another grant. So here's our we have to try to look. Here's our our eligibility map for our grants. The NRCBW is going to be this one in the red with the hatch on it. Here's for the NETMWD, and then this is for the Cypress Basin. The green ones are SFAM. So the way we do our grant programs, like I said, you can apply for more than one grant. With these blue down here, this is all CPP grant money near national forest. And then the green is SFAM for counties with community wildfire protection plans. With our grants, we only awarded 15 for NRCBW this year. That's how much we had the funds for. But in reality, we're really focusing on these areas here that are not covered by one of the other grants. We can get the same benefit for as far as the restoration program for the NRCBW with other grant funds that we have a little more funding available for them. Another thing is too, for the landowners, the CPP and SFAM grants offer a $30 an acre cost share versus the $22.50. So it helps the landowners out a little more. We hope to add more counties to like the SFAM grants through additional CWPP. So if we can get these counties here with a community wildfire protection plan, then we can add those to it and kind of increase the funding available for the landowners. Well, all of our applications are done online. So normally we have application periods is either August or September. It kind of varies from year to year based on wildfire response. We don't want to open up the application period whenever we're not available to assist with applications. So we try to time that to whenever we're available. It doesn't affect the actual awarding of the grants or the other grant programs from there. We also have some other funding opportunities available. So I'll get some handouts over there. One is our funding connector app. You can get online and you can put in your county or just locate where your property is, and then you can see what the state funding opportunities are available. It could be prescribed fire grants, or it could be something else related to vegetation or forestry. You can also access that through our website, or you can type in the address here, or just Google funding connector. We also have a Texas Forest Information Portal with landowner assistance tools, and there's a link to the funding connector app on there. And that can be found either at this address or on our website. If you'll click on the Managed Forest and Lands tab, there's a link in there for Texas Forest info. With that, do y'all have any questions on our grants, or those kind of quick overview?
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of this particular program. But if anybody knows any landowners have dealings with them or have holdings, and you're interested in doing some prescribed fire, sounds like this is the man to get a hold of. And other than that, there are a couple of other funding situations in the state too, that if for some reason theirs is not open or things, the Conservation Delivery Network, I think a couple of the folks are on the call for that. So if you're interested in getting something burned in East Texas, reach out to Weldon, reach out to me, somebody, and we'll get you with the right people to get in that program. But I know fire is kind of a bad, dirty word in East Texas after 2011 with the drought and the big fires. But it's the first thing on Weldon's slide said water quality. And that's the thing, is that if you can keep properly managed lands, especially near a reservoir body of water, really go a long way to buffer the runoff and slow it down. It helps overall water quality in all of these Texas. So it's a win-win if we can get people to actively and properly manage their land. It helps our jobs as water quality people a bunch. So.
Is there a minimum of acreage?
No, ma'am, there's no minimum of acreage. There is a max of 800 acres per applicant. So that can be on multiple tracts of land. So if you have a 200 acre and a 300 acre, then you can apply for both of those and you could get approved for both.
Well, I want to mention Jack Salmon here. He's recently done a prescribed burn. I also want to mention Nelson Roach is someone who has done prescribed burn. So you are in the company of people who, Jack, you do believe in prescribed burns, right?
Just finished one about 5 months ago.
Yeah, I think Nelson's, I think they finished his up last week. We're working towards it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we have.
We did, and it was a great burn. It does a fabulous job to change the environment. And as far as the you brought up the 2011 fire. Well, the prescribed burns, what you're doing is you're burning off the fuel that's on the ground. And so, if we have another drought, I feel like I'm at an advantage to surviving a wildfire because the burning that we've done over the years has really eliminated a lot of that fuel that's on the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
And prescribed burn, you control the fire in 2011 was just out of control panic.
That's right.
Yeah. With prescribed fire, you're timing the fire and putting it on the ground when you want it on the ground to meet your management objectives. With wildfire, it's kind of a crapshoot. A lot of times you'll have total vegetation removal with a wildfire with high intensity. I think Mr. Bartish raised his hand. Do you have a question, sir?
Bill, do you have a question?
I sure do. I stuck it in the chat as well. You were talking about, Weldon, you were talking about the community protection grants. How does a county or a community go about getting an approved plan so they can then be eligible?
Okay, that's a great question. And that's also why I've invited Sean Dugan here to come along with us. He's our Wildland Urban Interface Coordinator for Northeast Texas. We can work with him, or we can work, you can go straight to the county judge to help create a plan, but ultimately it'll be TFS personnel helping with the local government to get the plan implemented and approved. Each of the CWPPs, so there's 3 basic components to them. They need to have collaboration between local, state, and federal partners. And then from there, we'll go in and do risk assessments for the communities in the county, and we'll come up with mitigation solutions to help reduce those risks. After that, then it's up to the county and the local cooperators of what they want to have in the plan. But those are the 3 basic requirements for it. But we do work with the county. Usually it's the county judge or the EMC in the county.
Gotcha.
What's it next thing?
Emergency Management Coordinator. The plan will have to be assigned by the county judge and by our agency directors. Those are the ones that will authorize the plan and approve the final plan. Sometimes the county judges want to be directly involved with the creation of it. I've seen other ones where they kind of hand that off to the Emergency Management Coordinator. Does that help out with answering the question?
Bill?
That was great. Yeah, great.
Okay.
Well, I see also said county or city. So normally we're kind of in a phase where we're trying to push more county plans, but cities can apply to or can create their own wildfire protection plans. We've done them in the past even for local communities too. We have some plans that are for fire districts. So your local volunteer fire department can create their own plan. But like I say, right now, we're kind of more in the county phase where we would like to see the CWPPs move to. I think nationwide, that's kind of where they're trending also.
Very good. Very good information. Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, then we certainly appreciate it.
All right. Again, thank y'all for coming out. I have some handouts here. So if y'all are online and you didn't get the handout, send me an email. My email is wdent@tfs.tmu.edu, and I can get that information out to you. Or if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Turn it over to you, Robert.
All right. Looks like we got Tim Bister is going to give us
Oh,
an
yeah,
update
sorry.
on things that are
going on in the basin as far as Texas Parks and Wildlife, inland fisheries. So Tim, the floor is gonna be yours.
Thank you. Yeah, the first hour, this should go pretty quick. Huh?
Just promise no more math.
No more math, no.
I did too much math. Oh, shoot. Let me share screen. Hey, Angie, you see that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
We don't. We do.
Oh, you don't?
Tell us what we're talking about, Andy.
Well, there's a blue slide with some yellow text.
Yeah. Fish and TPWD.
Yep.
All right. One of these days, I'm going to figure this all out. All right. Let me know if you see full screen of the TPWD.
Hold, please. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Angie.
Mhm.
You have your, you can use either mouse and to drive, and then you got this your laser pointer.
Okay,
So,
all right.
and that'll show up on this screen as well as the folks. remote.
Excellent. All right, well, I'm glad to be here today. I'm the District Fisheries Management Biologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife in the northeast part of the state. My main job is to make fishing better. We do this by doing population surveys, recommended fish stockings, harvest regulation changes, surveying fisheries habitat and reservoirs, and looking at invasive species. So a lot of what I'll talk about today, I'll just kind of go stepwise from Lake Cypress Springs downstream in the basin, touching on each reservoir and basically what the invasive species status is for aquatic plants and some other things we've got going on in the basin. Click down there. All right, so Lake Cypress Springs, the main species I'll talk about today are alligator weed, hydrilla, giant salvinia, or water hyacinth. Alligator weed, it's very trace amounts, about an acre or so in the lake. Hydrilla was previously problematic in the reservoir. The last time triploid grass carp were stocked was in 2007, and that combined with some natural conditions that really kind of shaded out hydrilla in the following year, kind of crashed the population of hydrilla, and we haven't seen it come back since. So we're vigilant to look out for it and be able to do some targeted management when it comes back to avoid, trying to avoid more grass carp stocking, because grass carp, if they don't have hydrilla to eat, they're going to eat native plants that we want to have in the reservoir. To try and counteract that, Franklin County Water District does have a ecosystem restoration project where they raise their own native plants and put them out in the reservoir. Lake Bob Sandlin used to have quite a fair amount of hydrilla itself. We haven't seen any since 2016. There's been no grass carp stocking there. There's been no herbicide treatment of hydrilla. I think it's really related to the low water conditions that we've had with the couple drought periods. Really affected the growth. And when you get the water comes back with some of these rain events in the spring, time just right, turbidity levels get up and really kind of shades out the ability for plants to sprout up from the bottom. We did detect a small amount of water hyacinth in Monticello Cove. You can see in that picture here, is water hyacinth. You can see the purple flowers and the plants just kind of mixed in. Even though water hyacinth is generally a floating plant, it will grow in wet substrate conditions like that. So Texas Parks and Wildlife did go in and spray this area, and we're going to continue to monitor that as we go. Alligator weed at Lake Bob Sandlin, we had a period of time where a noticeable amount started growing in the reservoir. We released alligator weed flea beetles, which we got from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers out of Florida. They have a program where each year they try and collect some and send them throughout the country where they can be released and help to control the alligator weed. So you can see that in the years following that flea beetle introduction, we did have a good reduction of alligator weed out there, and it's really not problematic for any homeowners at this time. So I hope that continues to stay the case. Another interesting thing last year we did at Lake Bob Salem was we installed some artificial fish habitat. This project was funded with our largemouth bass conservation license plate program. That program, it costs somebody $30 a year to have that plate, and $22 of that comes back to Texas Parks and Wildlife for use to help manage fish in the state. So this was in cooperation with Titus County Freshwater Supply District, and one of the local game wardens helped put together these structures, and we put them out in the lake, and these coordinates are available on the Parks and Wildlife website. Lake Welsh has hydrilla in it. Some years it can be fairly abundant. It seems to be suppressed during some of the hotter summer months that we have, but it always seems to come back. There is consistent coverage of alligator weed, mainly in the upper end of the reservoir, and we did release some flea beetles last spring to help control that. I just stopped by the boat ramp yesterday on my way back from Mount Pleasant, and happy to report there's no giant salvinia at the boat ramp. I always try and stop and look and keep an eye on those types of things. Another thing at Lake Wells, some of you may be aware that we had a pretty substantial fish kill last summer, most likely attributed to warm, hot water temperatures and low dissolved oxygen. We did one of our routine fall electrofishing surveys last fall, and you can see where probably a lot of these smaller fish were lost. So we may have a weak year class going forward in the next few years, but the number of larger fish in the population still seems to be about what it has been in the past. So I'm not real worried that this one fish kill event is going to have a drastic impact on the future of the bass population and fishing in the lake. But we may see a little bit of a weaker year class going forward, but it won't take long for that population to rebound. Lake Gilmer has hydrilla present, but it's always pretty stable. There's a kind of a ring that goes around the entire lake. It really serves as a pretty decent habitat for the fish populations and for anglers to fish. It doesn't cause any access issues for boaters. So it's not a bad situation there. There's a trace amount of alligator weed. Giant salvinia has shown up at the boat ramp several times over the last 10 years. We've always been able to spot it quickly and eradicate it with either physical removal or herbicide spraying. Most recently, we had an introduction just this past December, and I think we've been successful at eliminating it yet again. So we'll count our blessings every time we can do that. Lake Lone Star, the hydrilla there has been fairly stable the last few years. It can become problematic for lakefront homeowners. Several years ago, a group of them got together and funded herbicide application by a private applicator when the lake was down a couple of years ago for some spillway repair. I think that really impacted some of the hydrilla abundance there. And right now, it's not problematic at all. Ellison Creek, is that the official name now? Okay.
It took me for.
Yeah. Yeah. When people talk about Jim Chapman, I still, oh, is that Cooper? Yeah. So I'll get there. I can't tell you how many times I've written a report for Ellison Creek, and I'll have to switch it the next time I write a report. It is.
Yeah. So growing up, my grandfather always wanted to go fish there, and we'd go fishing at Lake Lone Star. And then I started working on this project, and it was Ellison Creek Reservoir. I'm like, well, that's right where Lake Lone Star is. Yeah. So Actually, I don't know. TCQ calls it Ellison Creek. I don't, it's always been known as Lone Star.
Calls it there in Lone Star, everybody calls it Lone Star.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll need to check the Water Development Board, because that's usually what we call it. Whatever the Water Development Board calls
Yeah.
a reservoir, that's what we'll call it. We did detect giant salvinia and a little bit of water hyacinth there a couple years ago, and we've been actively managing the giant salvinia. It's a little strange there. It did not show up at a boat ramp. There's is that 259 that goes across the very upper end, and it was yeah, a lot of giant salvinia growth like up underneath that bridge. So, I don't know if somebody stopped there to fish and had something on their equipment from Caddo or some other place, or from Lake of the Pines, or if it came in on, a bird's foot or.
Right. It's not far from Pine.
Right.
Infestation of Pine over there.
Yeah, but actually, we've got a team out there today doing another follow-up survey and herbicide treatment if necessary. So we've been keeping the salvinia at a small, manageable level. I hope it stays that way. Lake of the Pines, you can see as we go further down the watershed, we seem to get a longer list of invasive species, and wait till you get to Caddo, right? But Lake of the Pines does have hydrilla. It's generally fairly stable, doesn't create any access issues. Water hyacinth has been quite abundant in the past, but in recent years, the coverage has been low and really hasn't required a lot of treatment. Alligator weed is present, but generally doesn't require too much management. Giant salvinia, on the other hand, was introduced several years ago between the 259 and 155 bridges, and that area up there is pretty complex, and it's just tough to be able to eradicate it from there. So we're at a point where Corps of Engineers, Northeast Texas Municipal Water District, Texas Parks and Wildlife are working together to try and manage the giant salvinia with herbicide treatments. And we are seeing that it's expanding. So I think this year we're going to be increasing our efforts and hopefully be able to get it out with it. So as we go downstream of Lake of the Pines, many of you may be familiar with our paddlefish restoration project. Paddlefish used to be present in the watershed. Right now, we're in about the middle of a 10-year restocking program. Last year would have been I believe our 4th year, which fish are raised at the Tishomingo National Fish Hatchery in Oklahoma. Last year, they weren't able to raise enough fish for us to stock, which that's okay. It doesn't bother me to have a missing year, because then if we sample some fish that looked like they should have been spawned last year, we could say maybe that's natural reproduction. But to try and help out this year, Fish and Wildlife Service collected some brood fish in the Red River in Louisiana, and one of the national fish hatcheries in Louisiana are going to be spawning this fish. So this is a partnership with Fish and Wildlife Service, Parks and Wildlife, Caddo Lake Institute. The Water District here has been very involved, the Corps of Engineers. It's a project with a lot of partners, and it's a very interesting fish, and a lot of work that's done in the watershed benefits the paddlefish, but also benefits a lot of other species in the river downstream.
I know it's the only one in Texas, but it may be the only one anywhere.
The paddlefish?
Paddlefish restoration.
Oh, I'm not sure. It's a good point. It is the only restoration project in Texas for sure. There are other places in the country that have thriving paddlefish populations that actually have fishing seasons for them. So Texas, East Texas is kind of on the edge of the paddlefish range, and that's where we see a lot of species that have issues on the edge of their range where they need a little help, and hopefully this restoration is going to help out. We're getting close now to where we have fish in the system from the restoration project that are old enough to be able to spawn. Paddlefish take about 8 years or so before they're old enough and mature enough to spawn. So we haven't detected any natural reproduction from our fish that we've stocked in the past, but I think this is Mike Montaigne. He's with the Fish and Wildlife Service. He's the lead of the project. I think he's talked about maybe getting out there and trying to do some look for larval fish this year, or be able to track some of these fish with transmitters that they have to some known spawning sites. So it's an exciting project. And then we get down into Cattle Lake, and giant salvinia is probably the most problematic invasive species that we have there. The Texas side of Cattle Lake is about 12,000 acres or so, and you can see in 2013 and 16 and 17, we had almost half of our water on our side of the lake covered with giant salvinia. Thanks to some cold winters and our improvements that we have with our herbicide applications, these past 4 years have actually been pretty good. We didn't have the cold snap this winter that we did the last few years, but we'll see what that turns into as we go further into the growing season. We continue to look at herbicide mixes that are really effective, and the contractor that we're working with now is doing a really good job.
Tim, can I stop for just
Yes,
a
sir.
second? The first time I ever heard giant salvinia was in this room in 2006, when we said at this meeting, it's in Louisiana, and we first tried to keep it in Louisiana for actually. So that's why his graph starts with 0 in 2006.
That's right.
Caddo had 0 in 2006, but Caddo, Texas, but Caddo itself had it in 2006, a few hundred acres on the Louisiana side. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, I appreciate all of those efforts that's happened since 2006. And a good amount of the money that was spent in the early days that came from the city of Marshall and from local contributions. The genesis of it was the Clean Rivers program, and more particularly the Stakeholders program. So one of the things that's not lost on me is those people that are participating online, and those people participating in the room. Now, y'all take that message back, and we do find solutions, but it starts with somebody saying, hey, we're gonna have to do something about that. And I'm gonna say in the Cypress Basin, that conversation of giant salvinia started in this room in 2006. And Roy's not in the room at the moment. He was part of that conversation too, but Tim, you are an integral part of that conversation. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it, Walt. This is a look at the herbicide treatments that we've done at Cattle Lake on the Texas side since 2012, where we changed this color from blue to green. This is when Texas Parks and Wildlife really got a big increase in funding from the Texas legislature. So we've been able to maintain a higher level of treatment on the lake, and which, I think that's, in addition to the winters that we've had, definitely is the reason why we've been able to have more of a manageable level of salvinia throughout the lake, which has resulted in boaters and anglers and paddlers and everybody being able to use the lake like they'd like to do. This is just a look. The brighter the red here is the higher the concentration of salvinia in these little block sections. And so I just wanted to show here, this was 2017 when we had over 5,000 acres on our side of the lake. And we go to 2021, you see not as much coverage and definitely not as much bright red. So we're going to try and continue to manage the salvinia that way. Another way that we manage the salvinia, Texas Parks and Wildlife, as well as the Cattle Biocontrol Alliance, using the giant salvinia weevil, which is an insect from Brazil, where giant salvinia is native, to release and help control giant salvinia. Its life cycle, they lay the eggs in the giant salvinia, and the eggs hatch, and the larvae kind of eat the salvinia from the inside and disrupt the growth. We're kind of where our latitude is, we're just a little bit cold, a lot of winters for the salvinia and the salvinia weevil to survive. But we're hopefully building the population of these salvinia weevils. We have continued releases each year, and Parks and Wildlife is definitely thankful for the private group, the Cattle Biocontrol Alliance, that helps raise and release weevils. This is one of the Parks and Wildlife sites where we've got a floating boom across the back of Pine Island Pond that we've released weevils in the back here. And hopefully they get their numbers up to the point where they're able to control what's back there, or more importantly, where we can actually remove some of this plant material, which contains all the weevils, and move them to other parts of the lake to be beneficial. The area outside the boom is where we manage with the herbicide. So to keep it open to boating and lakefront homeowners, situations like that. So the weevils are a long-term approach. We hope that as they continue to produce different generations, maybe they get a little more cold tolerant. There's some research being done where folks are trying to go to South America and collect weevils from colder climates that may be more cold tolerant, so we can release them there. We're seeing success with the weevils a little bit further south in Texas. I think we're just not quite there yet at cattle, but we're going to continue to work on them. Water hyacinth is another invasive species at cattle we've had a lot of problems with, but we haven't in recent years. A lot of that is due to the abundance of giant salvinia outcompeting the water hyacinth, as well as anything else that's in there. But we're seeing it this year. And the good thing is the herbicide that's used for giant salvinia control also controls water hyacinth. So it's getting treated just right alongside the giant salvinia when we see it. Hydrilla being a non-native species that's on our invasive species list, doesn't cause a lot of problems at Cattle Lake. Anglers like to fish it. We've seen it where it's fairly abundant in some years, but we haven't seen a big problem with it. Last year, we didn't have a whole lot because of the early spring rains that we've talked about earlier today. Results in higher water level, more turbidity, and keeps the plant from growing earlier in the year, and that just kind of plays out for the rest of the year. But I think what we've seen this year, it's already active and growing, so it should be a higher coverage hydrilla year. One good thing about hydrilla is it's rooted, not like water hyacinth or giant salvinia that's a floating plant. So wherever hydrilla is, that's where it's going to stay. You're not going to go the next day after the wind shifts and have your fishing hole covered up by something else. Another one that we've been dealing with at Caddo is crested floating heart, and this is one to look out for at other reservoirs in the basin around the state. It's definitely showed some invasive potential where it is in the country, different parts of the country. This is all just individual points where we found it when we first detected it in 2014. You'll see the next slide is 2015. The points are more numerous, and then by last year, now we're to the point where we're surveying, like I showed you the salvinia map, the darker the brown here is the higher concentration. Like this area up here in Jackson Arm area is over between 75 and 100% covered by crested floating heart, and it's stretched throughout pretty much the majority of the lake. So it's one that we're trying to work with new herbicide, and talked to one of the herbicide reps last year, and he said, well, if you're really treating this, you really need to be at this different concentration. So we're going to try that this year and hopefully have some better success with crested floating heart control. Switching from plants, talk about invasive carp. These are the Asian carp, big-headed carp or silver carp, the ones that you see videos up in the Midwest where all the fish jumping out of the water. We have seen them in Big Cypress below Lake of the Pines years past, and I think they got up over the Caddo Spillway. That would have been winter of 2009, 2010. We had water going over the spillway for a period of about 3 months. And I think fish were able to swim up from the Red River and 12 Mile Bayou. We haven't seen a lot of fish since a dewatering of the Lake of the Pine Spillway several years ago. And I think the last time that they dewatered, we didn't see any at all. So we also have them in the Sulphur River since below Wright Patman. It's unimpounded from there to the Red River. They've been in the Red River since about 1998. But to kind of prevent transport or transfer or spread of these species, we have a live bait removal or transport restriction below Lake of the Pines or below Lake Wright Patman and all tributaries of the Red River, where you can't take live non-game fish. You know, a lot of people used to like to cast net for shad below Lake of the Pines. Shad look a lot like a juvenile big head carp, so we wouldn't want anybody to be able to confuse one and bring them someplace else to spread. It's okay to use those live fish, catch them in the water that you're going to use them. But if you're going to take them someplace, they need to be dead before they leave. A little mention on invasive mussels. Luckily, we don't have zebra mussels in our part of the state yet. I don't know if we will. They say the water chemistry doesn't really have enough calcium to be able to support what zebra mussels need. But years ago, we thought we'd never see them down south because it was too hot down south. But here they are. You can see all the dots. Be vigilant when you're out there checking your sensors and things. Look for zebra mussels that might have attached. If you've got things, Randy, if you've got stuff that are out there all the time, that would be the kind of place that it would
And we have
attach to.
snails.
Yeah, we have
Lots and lots of snails.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the other thing is most recently we do have a quagga mussel positive lake. This is Lake Amistad out in West Texas. That's the first confirmed occurrence of quagga mussels in the state.
Snails, there is like a Asian snail, right? The problem.
But that's the
San Antonio.
right, and I think they have them in Houston too. Those are the apple snails. I think those are the egg masses that look like bubble gum that you see above the water. Yeah, we don't have any of those up here either. Yeah. So to prevent the spread of these things, we do everything we can to try and get the word out to keep from spreading invasive species around. We have a requirement to clean and drain all the water out of your boat and any containers that were on your boat. Hopefully not spread these things around. So we'll keep looking out for them, and everybody else should too. All right, well, didn't take an hour. That's all I got.
Really, that's it?
That's it. That's it.
man.
I know I went
I
fast,
was
but
trying to get comfortable.
I hear you. I want to mention, Tim, this past weekend, there's a little store that's reopened on the north side of Caddo, right there at the intersection of 727 and 49. Anyway, so I went in there and there was a guy buying some bait, buying some minnows and some goldfish. And the lady behind the counter was telling him about what you said about, not carrying your bait fish to other lakes, release them in the lake. And so he asked her why. So she launched into exactly why. But the problem was she was telling him it was related to zebra mussels, not the carp and things. So I give her an A for effort, but she also made him aware of two different things inadvertently.
Yeah.
But, and I said, well, yeah, but that was strange that she had the presence enough to be sure to warn him, but I think it's more like you'll get a ticket if you don't do this, or whatever.
Well, actually, the water draining rule is because of zebra mussels, because the zebra mussels have their juvenile stage is microscopic. You can't see it in the water, so you don't know if you're transporting it or not.
Right.
So even though we don't have zebra mussels here, that water draining rule does apply statewide. So she
was right.
telling the right stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, she got the message across.
Yeah, that's good.
The main thing.
Yeah, I've heard those stories before with you got to have your receipt if you take minnows from someplace.
Right, yeah, exactly. So anybody have any questions for Tim that are online?
I see something in the chat. You see the little-
Somebody in the chat?
Let's see.
Yeah, it's Ruben again. I can read it out. I got two questions. The first one was pertaining to the hydrilla. Just curious to see what type of herbicide y'all use and application rates, recommendations for smaller ponds, and what I guess the growing season would be the best time to spray.
So for hydrilla, there are several herbicides that work for it. I think one of the contractors at Ellison Creek Reservoir that is going to do some work for one of the homeowners there. I've recommended they use a copper-based herbicide, which will be, it's a little bit easier on the environment, I think, and won't have as much spread and impact other species. They're talking about trying to do multiple treatments throughout the year, just keep things cleared there. You definitely want to, as soon as plants start growing and through the middle of the summer, I think is good. Once you start getting towards the fall, the hydrilla is going to kind of fall out anyway. So any money that you might spend on a fall treatment is just better saved, and deal with it that fall and just save your money and treat next spring when it starts growing again.
Copy that. And my last question was, thanks for explaining more in depth the life cycle of the weevil that's targeting one of the plants up there. But my second question is for alligator weed flea. I was just curious to see how long that NEPA process is, getting it from another state, and we don't consider it invasive here, but it is non-native. And just curious to see when y'all release these, what is it? The insect, what is it called? The alligator weed flea beetle. Are y'all releasing same sexes or females and males? And are they able to reproduce? Or are they just here briefly for the summer and then they die back? And could they have a negative impact on any other plants if there's no alligator weed left?
Okay, those are several good questions. So the alligator weed flea beetle, I think it's probably one of the most successful insect controls for non-native aquatic plants that we've had in the country, and it's been released since I think the early 70s. So it's gone through this approval process back then, and any of these insects that are going to be used for a biological control go through that EPA process, where they're ensured they're going to be host specific. Once whatever they're using is gone, they're not going to switch to a native plant. So the alligator weed flea beetle has gone through that many years ago. So just because we're getting insects from Florida, they're already approved for use throughout the country. I don't think there's no identifying between males and females on these flea beetles, and I think we actually would want a mix of them because they will survive in Texas. So we want them to be able to reproduce. The only thing, they may not survive a real cold winter, but I have seen where we've seen evidence of them from year to year at Caddo Lake and Bob Sandlin. So I think we are getting some overwinter survival, and that graph I showed at Bob Sandlin, I think it shows that we are having a pretty good impact using those. And as they do fly, so I think as they get spread around, I think that's one of the reasons why alligator weed is not considered to be super invasive, because the flea beetles have been in the country for so long.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions?
I've got one here. Angela said at TRA, we have a contract with USGS to monitor for zebra mussel, eDNA, villagers. That's the microscopic version, and adults in Lake Arlington. And I think also in Lake Livingston during our routine monitoring. We also fill out a checkbox at all of our monitoring sites that we have, either looked for zebra mussels and didn't find them, seen evidence, or didn't look for them for the bridge sampling sites. So that's good. It sounds like they've got a protocol in place to be looking for zebra mussels. Every time we go to a boat ramp, you know, we some places have put out these samplers to let them grow on, but I think we found it. You just turn over some rocks that are in the water and you find them attached there just as easily. So we try and do that as many places we go, but we don't have an official checklist or anything.
Now, I know at Texoma, you can just walk along the shore and reach in the water 2 or 3 inches deep and turn over a rock. And a lot of times they're right there on the rock. So, yeah, but, that's interesting. And one thing I do want to mention, kind of segue in to what Tim was just talking about, and Angie, is that there's TxDOT is going to be replacing a bridge on Lake of the Pines, the 155 bridge, and they're going to let the bid in October of this year, and probably be a 3-4 year project. But here in the next few weeks, they're going to be doing a zebra mussel study around the bridge, looking to make sure. You know, I told probably, like I said, I don't think the water chemistry is such that you're going to find any, but it doesn't hurt to look. If somebody's going to look. But I don't think they're doing anything with native mussels. I think they, of course, that's in a lake setting, not in a creek or stream, but they are going to do, they did say they were going to do a zebra mussel survey.
Well, I hope they don't find any. I imagine zebra mussels are probably one of the worst nightmares for anybody in the in the water supply business. Yeah.
And I do want to mention that the district plans on deploying at least one additional SON in the close proximity to where this bridge activity will be. Because what Randy pointed out, our continuous monitoring station, we have one that's of the before picture, and we have one that is the after picture. And we kind of like to supplement that with a during picture. And we hope that nothing adverse comes from the bridge building exercise. Anyone who has driven that bridge knows that it's 2-lane and it's dangerous when you meet a 18-wheeler. And so I'm excited about a 4-lane bridge that will provide people safety and reduce the risk of a vehicle accident that then falls into the water. So it's a good thing that we're going to do the bridge, but we need to be prudent about making sure that as we do a good thing, we don't accidentally do something that changes the condition of the water. That's why we're going to do the additional monitoring. So I did want to mention to this group that that's because the bridge building exercise starts in earnest this fall. We'll be getting that and deploying it so that we can get a complete picture of what's going on in the water as they're doing their bridge work.
And it will be constant monitoring. It'll be out there for the life of the project and then beyond. So at least 4 years, maybe longer. So.
And that bridge is going to be open bank to bank all the way across it, right?
It's going to be what I'm going to call a modern bridge.
Yeah.
The old bridge is mostly a levee with a small span of open, and they're going to remove those pilings that are in the open area, but they're going to leave in place the 2 levees. Now, they may affect the elevation of those levees, but right now, the plan now is to leave those levees. I believe they provide a helping water quality function. 5 years ago, when they were talking about this bridge, the idea was just to excavate it down as though it never was there. And we were not in favor of that. We were in favor of leaving in place what we see as a levee that gives the water more opportunity to be affected by the plants that are in that water. And hydrilla may not be native, but if it's rooted there and the water is in there, hydrilla is doing a beneficial thing as it's sequestering or consuming some of those nutrients. And as a segue to what Robert's gonna talk about. We still, 20-something years ago, we were caring about nutrients. We still care about nutrients, and so in that zone that's in the upper lake, we need to be helpful to what can be done naturally and excavating to extinction the levee. I don't think that's a helpful thing. So that's why over the last 5 years, they have changed from removal as the principal strategy on the old bridge to leaving the functionality. And most of the time, when the elevation is routinely below 233, we're going to get beneficial aquatic control of some of these nutrients. And some of them are hydrilla. So you may hear other people say that hydrilla is a nuisance. That's it from me. And that's because we need the help that nature can give us.
Well, I'm glad to hear
I
that.
understand that TPWG is not spraying for hydrilla in Lake of the Pines.
No,
Not on purpose.
Okay.
no, I'm glad to hear that. I was kind of worried if they took out the levees and you'd have increased flow, you'd have Salvinia getting flushed down. So keeping them there, it slows the water down, allows sediments to fall out, and probably really helps with your water quality
Right.
downstream of that.
See, and I'm glad you volunteered that, because that modern style bridge radically changes what we've enjoyed for the last 40 plus years.
Yeah.
And so we do need to get the 18-wheelers off of that narrow thing, but that's wide enough for it to be a real benefit. So I'm for the new bridge, but I'm also for leaving in place something that I think is environmentally helpful, and I appreciate your perspective on that.
Any discussion on allowing people to go out and fish on the old road?
That's going to be a core thing, and they may do that.
Yeah.
And it may be that they affect the top elevation to try to get at that recreational component.
Yeah.
So what we most recently know is they don't want vehicles on that. So they will do something to by a gate or a barrier to prevent vehicle traffic on it. But pedestrian traffic with a fishing pole, that's probably the future of that levee.
They're gonna leave the concrete armoring on the sides of it, but the top, when they take it down, will be grassing or something. I'm not sure exactly what, so. Yeah, we had a good meeting with them 2 weeks ago, I guess, talking about design and criteria, so that's good. Anybody else in the chat? No? Tim, we appreciate all the
Okay.
info on that.
You're welcome.
That was great.
Thank you, sir.
So, I got good news and bad news, folks. There are 2 more slides is all we've got left before the test. And, no, just kidding. The bad news is there's gonna be math involved. So can you pull up the phosphorus.
Yeah. Well,
My favorite topic is phosphorus loading.
okay, come on. Oh, no, that's too, okay.
So while Randy's pulling that up, we have, as mentioned before, with the dissolved oxygen, we are under a TMDL, a total maximum daily load for dissolved oxygen in Lake of the Pines. And the limiting factor that was determined through all the sampling and assessment was phosphorus was limiting the DO. So instead of each entity that had wastewater outfall coming into the lake getting their own treatment facilities and improving to take their phosphorus down, our group came up with a group permit at first. That didn't really fly. So the alternative was what's called a total phosphorus load agreement. And that's where TCQ determined that in order to stop the downward trend of DO, that we needed to reduce overall the phosphorus loading by 56%. And so these entities on your left
are the ones that are in part of that agreement with us. And what they did is they agreed to reduce their phosphorus out of their wastewater treatment plants, their point source, by 56%. And so they're mostly, they're little small towns, Pittsburgh, Mount Pleasant, probably the biggest ones. But we also have Pilgrim's Pride, and they are obviously the biggest producer of generator of phosphorus. And so we came up with this tracking program, and that they all will either through laboratories, or if they have their own lab, Mount Pleasant has their own lab, Pilgrims has their own lab, will give us their monthly pounds of phosphorus, total phosphorus. And then we will calculate how much they get per month, and then also what they have at the end of the year. So if you'll look at, if those of you at home are seeing this, the ones here, I have handouts if you want to take them or whatever, look at them too. But so every year since I started here in 2013, and we started gaining, the agreement had just been signed. We gained, I guess you would say, functionality with this in about 2015. And so we've got 7 years worth of data on most all of these. So we're able to look at the pink is what they're allocated, on the right is what they're allocated per year. The light blue is what they actually are released in that given year. And then the green is a variance. They were either over their allotment or under. And you'll see as you go down through there, the positives, there are 3 cities, 3 entities that are not meeting their allocation. They're over their allocations, a couple by a good bit, some barely. But in all, if you look down at the bottom of the blue column, the yellow right there, that's the actual pounds that was deposited into the stream, into Lake of the Pines by all entities combined for the year, which 14,290 pounds of phosphorus. Just to the right of that number is how much they're allocated. So they were allocated, even with a 56% reduction, they were allocated a total of 59,950 pounds. So they deposited 45,000 pounds less than they were allowed, which is a great success story. And I would be remiss if I didn't identify the entity that did that for us, which is Pilgrim's Pride. They were allowed 53,200. They only put out 8,500 this past year in 21. So, and the way they accomplished that is they spent $11 million on their wastewater treatment plant upgrade just to sequester the phosphorus. That probably wasn't the only reason, but that was the driving factor of doing that. And so what in turn that did is, even if these little towns had done nothing, which some of them have done nothing, is Pilgrims would still by far and away be taking that phosphorus out. So to us, this is a success story of something that you can do when you get together and look for a solution, instead of necessarily go to court and see each other. Because this was a hot topic in the 90s. Walt, we can tell you, this room was standing room only.
In this group, this is their first time hearing the subject. If you raise your hand, if this is the first time. Okay, now what I need to tell you is, one of the ways you sequester the phosphorus is by adding a chemical to it. And those towns that are over the limits, the agreement is that they will pay $3 a pound for each chemical to get, for the chemical cost, to get achieving their diet number, or the most that they're supposed to be getting out. That $3 is supposed to go to the district for our Clean Rivers and sampling regime. So even though Pittsburgh, JBS, Pilgrims, pays the cost of the chemical and does that removal, they don't ask that the money go to them. They ask that the money come here to help us do more water quality work. And that is not lost on me either, that some of the Clean Rivers money comes from the people in the basin or the industries in the basin that goes to Austin at TCQ and then comes back. But that's not the only way that this funding is done for clean rivers or for water sampling. So when you see those numbers that are negative, that's a good thing because that means they're staying below their diet. So that also means they're not needing to make a contribution to the water quality fund. The numbers that are positive, those are the communities that, out of fairness, they ought to be provided. And 25 years ago, we were very much divided upon whether science would lead or not. 25 years ago, politics was leading. And so I appreciate coming to a meeting like this one where we can focus on the science, where we can understand that our anxieties about DO and pH, they're different now than 25 years ago. But I wanted to mention that to the new people that this is simply a means to achieve what we need, which is Lake of the Pines was having too much phosphorus. We got to stay below, and we're achieving that goal. But in the breath that we say we achieve the goal, we also need to say it's a group effort. And those people that want somebody else to do it, okay, well, that's fine. Let somebody else do the work. But how about giving a little bit of money to help those people doing the work? That's the concept that that slide is based on.
That's right. And probably for the ones that have never heard anything about this is because, to my knowledge, this is the only such agreement in Texas. It's one of the very few in the US. I think this was modeled out after maybe somewhere in South Carolina that were doing something similar. They had a lot of chicken houses, a lot of things. But this is the only such agreement that's ever been accepted, at least by TCQ, for this type of project.
So it may be the first of its kind. Yeah. I'm hoping it's not the only of its kind.
And the last update to the TMDL on the TCQ website showed improving DO because of that. Now, Randy's data says we way improved the DO.
It still goes back to nutrients though.
Breaks,
yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's it in a nutshell. I can talk about that for days, but I know y'all don't want to be here for days. We're out of cookies. But does anybody have any questions about the phosphorus loading or anything more specific I could go into on that?
That's a great success story, and Pilgrim's Pride and TCQ periodically do some PR for themselves about that to get other places to adopt this. What happens to places like Lone Star who exceed their diet? Is there any ramification?
Okay, so Monday, my board meets. On Monday, the 7 of them will decide what to do about that. And this is a prediction. $3 times 668, right, Robert?
686, yeah.
686 is slightly more than $2,000. What I'll be asking them more actually on Monday is to authorize me to send a statement saying we kind of need to pay a little over $2,000. If they express resistance, what we would say is, well, still got to pay it. But my observation is it took 12 months to get to that overage amount. And if you divide that by 12, that's less than $200 a month. So even small communities, if we work with them and make it clear, it's not a financial hardship, but it's not zero either. So I appreciate that. Yeah, we need to tend to that. And in the early days of the implementation of this, we had this group basically saying you need to send the statement or not. Well, that's morphed into up to 7 board members make that determination. And that will be on Monday. And I can't speak for the board, but I can say my recommendation. And that is, it's kind of time for Lone Star to pay. What you see in the past is communities get over, and when they got over, this group said, let's go visit them first. So we visited them. And sometimes the community could adjust the processes, get back under their diet. So I'm glad that we did that. And that wasn't one of those examples where they were over, we visited, they got under, and it's all good. But if there's a pessimism, of we're over, and we're not gonna go back to weighing only 180 pounds, I won't. Okay, so at some point, reality sets in. And that's where we are for, and that's because last year we asked Lone Star and they can get back down. We're not going to get back down. So it is a community by community conversation. And if you are over in a year, so long as we get real help from JBS, we achieve the overall. But if everybody was just marginally doing, at least they could get by, we'd be in a different environment. So I appreciate those people that are actively trying to help us with our budget. And so that's my explanation to you that in 2014, we said, we're going to try this new thing for 10 years. So another year or two, we're going to have to decide, is the cooperative group approach still make sense? Or does everybody want to just do it on their own? I'm going to tell you, I kind of care about the money. So I know those towns, it's super more expensive to go on their own than to be part of a group. It's like that if we got a bus out there, we all ride on the bus. And 2023, next year, we're going to have to talk about, are we happy with this agreement, or do we want to suggest that these communities go on their own? And my advice right now is we're better off with the group approach, but we kind of have to mean it now when we say if we're over our quota, we kind of need to pay to get back under that quota. And that means different things to different people, because if you are Pittsburgh, you're way under your quota. So they're not so much worried about $3. But here at the district, TCEQ and others have been generous to us and helping us make sure we have an adequate water quality program. But we also need to get some help from those people that need to be paying those $3. That's part of my thinking on why on Monday, the 7 board members, and 2 of them are in the room. So that's not a quarrel. So you have elicited part of what I intend to say on Monday.
You paid me in a cookie.
Yeah.
I'll mention, we discussed this, like the 5 years from through 2020. And I believe it was somewhere around 100 tons of phosphorus that has been saved from has not gone into Lake of the Pines.
100 tons.
Something, it was somewhere in that range. So it's very,
I mean, we see the effects downstream, like.
oh yeah.
Improvements at Caddo
Yeah.
and Big Cypress. So I mean, it's helping everyone.
Right.
Yeah. Question.
Is the allotment like stagnant, or is it set to decrease like every few years or so?
Okay, so Dr. Ward from Austin, UT Austin, set what should be our diet. He said that you can't have any more than this many pounds or you'll run into trouble. So we have a max. And in that time frame, 20 years ago, we took what was your current concentration and what was your total authorized flow. And so to answer your question, it's stagnant because we always have to be under that line. And 20 years ago, we said, we think that's where the line is, but we could be wrong about that. And as we continue to monitor, 56% reduction was either too aggressive, not aggressive enough, or just about right. If we had achieved it and we were still seeing declining DO, we would have said that wasn't enough. You should have done more. But sampling doesn't suggest that, right, Randy? It does not suggest that we're on a continued downward pace. What happened in the last decade of the 20th century is we were in a declining VO position at Lake of the Pines. It is at least horizontal. And this morning, Randy has convinced me it's not horizontal, it's incline. So we are not wanting to make the lake look like a swimming pool, but we don't want to make it look like a stagnant pond either. So we have to find a balance. That's why over time, this group has to decide whether we need to change our target. And if we decide as a group to change the target, then we've got to change what, and what's not on the screen is most of the phosphorus comes from non-plant source. In our world, I've always operated off of the premise of all things being equal, 20% comes from the point, 80% comes from the cattle raisers, the chicken growers, the cross production, and rural septic systems. Rural failing septic systems, or if you live in Dallas or Austin, you may think most of the human waste goes to a central treatment location. In our country, most of it doesn't. These are where people's human waste goes. But that is the minority of what is generated. The majority of the human waste is generated in what's called OSSF, on-site septic facilities. And we do the OSSF program in 4 counties. That's on the bed.
We're fixing to talk about it right now, too.
Pull that up.